Chapter 1363. Alright. These Pikachu are no longer able to help you improve your abilities. We can leave this place, Gohan said to Lu Shihua after staying near the Pikachu colony for a whole month. That's great. I can finally leave this place. Lu Shihua's face revealed a joyful expression. They had been tossing and turning here for a month. If they didn't leave soon, Lu Shihua felt that she would be electrocuted silly. However, Lu Shihua's happiness didn't last for too long. She suddenly thought of something and asked Gohan with some fear, "Master, what do you plan to do with these Pikachu?" As Gohan's disciple, Lu Shihua naturally knew how vicious Gohan was towards Yuan Ko. During the month that they lived in this area, there were at least 20 waves of Yuan Ko who came looking for trouble with Gohan other than the Pikachu. However, these Yuan Ko were all killed by Gohan without exception. There was never a moment of mercy in his heart. The reason why he kept these Pikachu was because these Pikachu had value to Lu Shihua. However, now that their value had disappeared, and Gohan was preparing to leave, wouldn't these Pikachu be? What else can we do? Of course we'll kill them all, Gohan said indifferently, but there was no room for doubt. But Master, you've seen for yourself these days. These Pikachu rely on the fruits on the trees to survive. Moreover, unless you enter their territory, they won't take the initiative to harm humans. Master, can you let them go and give them a way out? Lu Shihua mustered up her courage and begged Gohan. During this month of interaction, Lu Shihua's attitude towards these Pikachu had changed from resentment at the beginning, wishing that she could kill these Yuan Ko who electrocuted her every day. Now it had become a silent friendship. These Pikachu also established a good relationship with Lu Shihua. In the later stages of the battle, the Pikachu no longer guarded Lu Shihua to the death. After destroying Lu Shihua's personal protective shield, they would take the initiative to stop the electric shock. Some of the Pikachu would even walk up to Lu Shihua's side and use their lightning-shaped tails to gently rub against Lu Shihua's face. The extremely cute appearance of the Pikachu coupled with some heartwarming actions completely captured Lu Shihua. Even though Lu Shihua knew that she would be reprimanded by Gohan for making such a request, she could not help but bring it up to Gohan, hoping to save the lives of these Pikachu. Humans are humans, and Yuenko is Yuenko. There is no such thing as a friendship between humans and Yuenko. Even if these Pikachu did not actively harm humans, once humans entered their territory, they would also attack humans, and humans would also die in their hands. Therefore, your reason is not valid. These Pikachu still have to die, Gohan said indifferently. But Master, what about you and Ms. Misaka Mikoto? Aren't you, Ms. Misaka Mikoto, and Mr. Lee by good friends? Lu Shihua regretted it as soon as she said that. It was equivalent to using his master's shortcomings to contradict him. It was obviously an extremely infuriating thing, and Gohan might be furious because of it. Ms. Misaka Mikoto, how can Mr. Lee be the same as these Pikachu? Lu Shihua heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Gohan was not angry at all. However, he rejected the idea right away. Ms. Misaka Mikoto and Mr. Lee are free people. They won't harm humans, so they can be friends with humans. What about the 3 Egyptian gods? They are not free people, are they? But Master, you still let them live. This time, Lu Shihua used the 3 Egyptian gods as an example. They are different too. Their godheads are in my hands. They dare not act rashly, Gohan said. But that was in the past. Didn't you return their godheads to them? They no longer have anything on you. If they want to kill, they can still kill humans without any scruples, Lu Shihua said without giving up. Don't worry. With me around, they won't dare to kill anyone, Gohan snorted coldly. His expression finally turned sour. Looking at Gohan's expression, Lu Shihua knew that his master was finally on the verge of losing his temper. At this time, it was wise to shut up and not care about the Pikachu anymore. However, Lu Shihua really did not want to see these cute little elves in his master's hands. Therefore, Lu Shihua bit his lips and continued, "Master, you can live for 100 years. It won't be a problem for you to live to 140 years old. But what about 140 years later? Master, do you think the 3 Egyptian gods will still be afraid of you? How dare you? Are you cursing me to die?" With a shake of Gohan's finger, 5 or 6 sword energies shot out from Gohan's palm, causing a violent explosion in the surroundings. Countless trees that were hundreds of years old and above were destroyed in such an explosion. Hearing such an intense and loud explosion, the Pikachu who were eating fruits in the campsite curiously looked towards the direction of the explosion. However, when they discovered that none of their compatriots were in the explosion range, they went back to eating fruits without a care in the world. They simply didn't expect that a fierce debate about their survival was currently going on. I don't dare to curse you, Master." Lu Shihua's knees softened. She directly knelt in front of Gohan, and kept kowtowing hard to show her loyalty to Gohan. But at the same time, Lu Shihua still refused to give up her obsession. She cried and said, "Master, you don't think these Pikachu are your friends, but your disciple has already treated these Pikachu as my friends. Master, are you going to let your disciple watch my friends die? Do you want me to be a useless person who can't even protect my friends? Sigh. Even at this time, you still don't know what's important." Gohan sighed, but his attitude finally softened. After thinking for a while, he said, "As a member of the human race and Master's disciple, everything must be in the interests of the human race. You must put the interests of our Master and disciple first. There's no reason for me to be friends with Yuan Ko. However, if you can find the value of these Pikachu, then maybe Master can consider letting them go." Gohan said lightly, "Thank you, Master. Thank you, Master." Lu Shihua kowtowed continuously. "Don't thank me so quickly. You only have an hour. If you can't find the value of these Pikachu in an hour, then Master will still have to kill all these Pikachu. Moreover, Master will have you kill all these Pikachu personally. As a future Emperor Sword wielder, if you don't even have a little bit of ruthlessness, how can you be an Emperor Sword wielder?" "Yes, Master." Lu Shihua knew that this was the limit of what she could fight for, so she immediately said without hesitation, "Master, since these Pikachu can discharge electricity, then we can bring them back to use as generators." "Stupid." Gohan rolled his eyes at Lu Shihua. "One large nuclear battery of mine can charge the entire Pikachu group. In other words, the entire Pikachu group's electricity output is far less than one large nuclear battery of mine. What a joke." Lu Shihua's face showed an expression of shame. She did not think too much in a moment of desperation, so she suggested this method that was indeed a joke. However, Lu Shihua did not give up. After thinking for a while, she immediately said, "These Pikachu are very cute. Why don't we introduce them as pets to our Yuzhong city? It will definitely make a lot of lonely people happy." "Yes. If these Pikachu are unhappy, it would be even more fun to electrocute those lonely people," Gohan said impatiently. Lu Shihua was speechless again. Lu Shihua thought of another 7 or 8 ideas, but none of them were reliable. The hour was getting shorter and shorter. Lu Shihua, who could not think of anything, could only walk to the side of the Pikachu group and silently watch these cute little elves cry. "Pikachu!" A Pikachu saw Lu Shihua appear and immediately jumped over in a friendly manner. It raised its yellow hands and handed a half-eaten apple to Lu Shihua. "Pika!" Seeing how this Pikachu waved its hands, it was obvious that it wanted to share this delicious apple with Lu Shihua. "Wah!" Lu Shihua hugged this Pikachu in her arms and began to cry loudly. This Pikachu instantly showed a pained expression. Obviously, Lu Shihua's posture made the poor Pikachu feel like it was about to suffocate. "I'm useless. I can't convince my master to let you live." Lu Shihua cried loudly. Hurry up and go. Hurry up and run, one by one. Don't ever meet us humans again. Hurry up and run. Lu Shihua shouted loudly, hoping that these Pikachu would escape. Unfortunately, the Pikachu did not understand what Lu Shihua was saying. Seeing Lu Shihua crying, they thought that Lu Shihua must be very sad. So, they gradually gathered around Lu Shihua and used a crisp and cute Pika to comfort their crying friend. Why are you guys like this? Hurry up and run. When Lu Shihua saw that the Pikachu did not escape but instead gathered together, he immediately cried even more sorrowfully. He muttered, "It's all my fault. If I didn't come looking for you guys to train your movement skills, you guys wouldn't have met Master and you guys wouldn't have died. It's all my..." At this point, Lu Shihua suddenly froze. He then stood up abruptly and leaped into the air. In the blink of an eye, he had crossed a few hundred meters. He knelt in front of Gohan and said excitedly, "Master, your disciple has thought of how to use these Pikachu." Chapter 1364. Pikachu! Pikachu, Pikachu! In the lush forest, a few humans walked in front, while a group of scattered Pikachu followed behind them, constantly speaking to Lu Shihua in a language that no one could understand. These Pikachu were seeing Lu Shihua off. Since they set off in the afternoon, Lu Shihua and the others had already walked dozens of kilometers, while these Pikachu had been following behind Lu Shihua. Pairs of reluctant little eyes looked at Lu Shihua and Gohan, calling out Pikachu, only hoping that Gohan and the others could stay and live with them. Of course, this was impossible. Lu Shihua had hoped for these Pikachu to go back quickly countless times, and even tried to chase them away, but these Pikachu still refused to leave. The ancient saying of sending someone off for 100 miles was nothing more than this. These Pikachu are quite affectionate and loyal, not at all blaming me for letting them live. Looking at these affectionate Pikachu, Gohan couldn't help but praise. Master! Hearing Gohan say this, tears flowed down from the corners of Lu Shihua's eyes again. Useless thing! Crying all day, what kind of person are you? Gohan knocked on Lu Shihua's head and said faintly, "Since you said that you want to use these Pikachu as training and cultivation tools for the future disciples of our Hongjun bloodline, then you will bring your disciples back here sooner or later, and you will meet them sooner or later." Yes, this was the method Lu Shihua thought of using these Pikachu. Lu Shihua told Gohan that since these Pikachu were so effective in training, then when Lu Shihua took in disciples in the future and inherited Gohan's swordsmanship, he could also use these Pikachu as training tools. Lu Shihua would bring his disciples to find these Pikachu in the future, and then, just like how Gohan trained Lu Shihua, he would use these Pikachu to train Lu Shihua's disciples, thus ensuring that the sword-bearers of Gohan's bloodline could continue to be strong. This reason successfully convinced Gohan. In the end, Gohan also decided to let these Pikachu go. As for these Pikachu who didn't know that they had just taken a trip to the gates of hell, after discovering that Gohan's people had left, they immediately chased after them energetically, and there was even such a touching scene of them sending each other off 100 miles away. However, 100 miles was only 100 miles. When the emerald green trees' trunks gradually turned black, and the leaves all withered, leaving only dead trees, the Pikachu suddenly blocked in front of Gohan's group. They shook their heads desperately, and their faces emitted electricity, as if they were stopping Gohan's group from moving forward. "Master, is there any danger in front?" Seeing this scene, Lu Shihua also realized that something was wrong with the situation. "If I'm not wrong, the 100 Ghost Forest is in front." Gohan's face also revealed a somewhat cautious expression. The 100 Ghost Forest was an area discovered by humans more than 700 years ago. It was so large that it almost occupied the area of a province. It was said that there were millions of ghosts and undead creatures hiding in this forest. Even the legendary Yama Palace and underworld prison were built in this forest. It was known as a dangerous place for humans, and it was said that there was even a flood-level Yuan Ko living in it. There were also records of immortal sword-tier sword-bearers being lost in this forest. In short, this was a rather dangerous area. Ordinary teams of sword-bearers did not dare to enter this area, and slightly stronger teams only dared to move around the periphery. Only teams with immortal sword-tier sword-bearers dared to go deep into this area, but they did not dare to provoke the flood-level Yuan Ko in the deepest part of the 100 Ghost Forest. And because this flood-level Yuan Ko never left the 100 Ghost Forest, humans were not interested in spending energy and taking a huge risk to kill this flood-level Yuan Ko. Gohan was the strongest immortal sword-tier sword-bearer, so of course he would not care about the 100 Ghost Forest. Instead, this 100 Ghost Forest had become the best training target in Gohan's eyes. Let's go. Let's go in. Gohan urged Lu Shihua. Although he was a little reluctant to leave these cute Pikachu, Lu Shihua still obediently walked into the depths of the 100 Ghost Forest. And these Pikachu seemed to be extremely afraid of this 100 Ghost Forest, so they did not dare to continue following behind Lu Shihua. They could only stand where they were, watching Lu Shihua and the others go further and further away with tears and sorrow in their small eyes. Goodbye! Lu Shihua kept waving back, saying goodbye to these Pikachu until they could no longer see those cute yellow figures. After a few weeks, a team of sword-bearers from Yanjing City also appeared near the Pikachu camp. When they saw these Pikachu again, they finally heaved a long sigh of relief. Ever since they entered this area, they had not seen any Yuan Ko for 5 days. They almost thought that there was some huge change or danger in the surroundings, so they felt jealous and uneasy. Now that they saw these Pikachu living together happily, they finally felt relieved. When they were ready to work together to eliminate these more than 200 Pikachu, they suddenly realized that these Pikachu did not seem to be afraid of humans anymore. After seeing them appear, not only did they not attack, but they even took the initiative to give a lot of fruits to the humans, then they happily returned to the camp. At the same time, on the most conspicuous rock on the outskirts of the camp, someone had stuck a notice board into the ground. Upon closer inspection, this notice board was actually made of dimensional alloy. This notice board only had a very simple sentence: "These Pikachu are all my pets. Whoever dares to harm them will be punished by me." And below this sentence was the signature of Sword Immortal Hong Jun. There was also a unique logo of Sword Immortal Hong Jun specially designed by the Sword Committee. At the same time, the entire team also discovered a lot of human garbage in the surroundings. They even discovered that a large nuclear battery had been modified into a charging device placed in the center of the camp. Those Pikachu were happily dancing around this charging device. "Captain? What should we do? Should we still destroy these Pikachu?" a teammate asked with some fear. "Destroy what? Can't you see that they are all Sword Immortal Hong Jun's pets? If Sword Immortal Hong Jun finds out that we are the ones who did it, he will teach you a lesson." The captain smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Forget it. You've seen it for yourself. These Pikachu have indeed been trained by Sword Immortal Hong Jun to become human friends. They didn't take the initiative to attack us either. Since that's the case, let them live happily here. Also, I finally figured out why there is no Yuan Ko around here. I'm afraid they have all been killed by Sword Immortal Hong Jun. Let's leave this place and go in another direction. Otherwise, we will still not meet a single Yuan Ko." As the captain spoke, he led these team members to find another direction and continue moving forward. "Disciple, do you know what type of Yuan Ko is the most dangerous Yuan Ko as a swordsman?" Gohan smiled and asked Lu Shihua, who was beside him. "I don't know." Lu Shihua shook his head. "It is the type of ghost Yuan Ko," Gohan said calmly. "Ghosts do not have a physical body. They are purely in the form of electromagnetic wave. We cannot see ghosts with our naked eyes. We can only rely on our own senses to determine the location of the ghost. This is undoubtedly an extremely dangerous thing for a swordsman. If we are not careful, the ghost will invade our body and eventually wear away our soul. Therefore, ghosts are the most dangerous yuan ko to a swordsman. Disciple has learned something, Lu Shihua said with heartfelt admiration. That's good. This will be your next training. Actually, after a month of training, your swordsmanship and movement technique have reached a certain level. However, as a sword master, your swordsmanship instincts are still lacking. As a sword master, your spiritual sense is still lacking. When you can forget your swordsmanship and only rely on your spiritual sense and instincts to fight, that's when you will have reached the most basic requirement of your master. Go. You can use these ghosts as your opponents. These ghosts cannot be seen with the naked eye. You can only use your spiritual sense to sense them. When you kill all the ghosts in the 100 Ghosts Forest, your spiritual sense will barely pass. Gohan said. Yes, master. Lu Shihua accepted the task that Gohan gave her very straightforwardly. How about this? Master will give you a little help. In our surroundings, there are 5 flood dragon level ghosts spying on you. They are preparing to melt your soul and take over your body. Now use your spiritual sense to sense and see if you can find their location. Gohan said with a smile. I understand. Lu Shihua nodded and closed her eyes. She wanted to sense the location of the 5 ghosts. Although Lu Shihua did sense the 5 gloomy energies in the surroundings immediately, and these 5 energies did have killing intent towards him, it was just a feeling. Lu Shihua couldn't find these 5 energies at all. Time passed minute by minute. Just as Lu Shihua was feeling extremely anxious, a voice suddenly sounded in Lu Shihua's ear. Sister, something is attacking you from your left rear. Okay. The moment the voice fell, the 8-winged seraphim sword in Lu Shihua's hand turned into a lightning-like sword light. Immediately, a resentful scream came from the river. The figure of a female ghost suddenly appeared at the place where the sword light had just landed. After a distortion in the space, it was sucked back by the dimensional vortex in the sky. Lu Shihua killed this flood dragon-level ghost with one sword strike. Although the ghost was indeed a kind of yuan ko with very little vitality and defense, Lu Shihua's attack had reached a quite terrifying level. Otherwise, it would be impossible for Yuan Ko, who was only 1 realm lower than Lu Shihua, to be killed by Lu Shihua so easily. However, at this time, Guhan's attention was not on Lu Shihua's rather stunning sword. Instead, he looked at Lu Yin, who was beside him, with some surprise. This little guy's natural spiritual sense was actually so terrifying. It was even stronger than Lu Shihua, who was at the spirit sword level. This was definitely not something that an ordinary person could do. Chapter 1365. Over the past few days, the ghosts and undead in the 100 Ghost Forest had fallen into a state of extreme fear. A team of sword-bearers had entered the 100 Ghost Forest, and one of the female sword-bearers seemed to have a deep hatred for the ghosts. She had actively sought out ghosts to fight and kill. The ghosts did not panic. Every year, there would be sword-bearers who entered the 100 Ghost Forest. In the end, they were either chased away by the ghosts, sent to the ultimate paradise, or possessed by the ghosts and turned into zombies, specters, and puppets. Therefore, when they discovered that a team of swordsmen had appeared again, the ghosts did not panic. Instead, they were quite happy. They felt that it was time for them to have their own bodies. In the beginning, it was just as the ghosts hoped. They relied on their ability to appear and disappear mysteriously to gain the upper hand. They defeated the female swordsman several times. However, every time the female swordsman was about to die, a stronger male swordsman would attack and forcibly snatch the prey from their hands. Fortunately, the stronger male swordsman only saved people and did not harm the ghosts. Otherwise, the ghosts would be too scared to attack. However, as the days passed, the ghosts were shocked to find that even if the stronger male swordsman did not attack, they would be too scared to attack. This was because the female swordsmen were growing at a crazy speed. In the beginning, they could not even detect the ghost's location. Now, they could sense the ghost's location even if they closed their eyes. What was more terrifying was that the female swordsman had terrifying swordsmanship. The additional damage from her sword was frighteningly high. Even a dragon-level ghost could not withstand 3 strikes from her sword. This caused the ghosts to fall into a great panic. They went from actively hunting the female swordsman to fleeing frantically. Unfortunately, the female swordsmen were much faster than them. In the end, they could only die under the female swordsman's sword. Therefore, in the end, the ghosts had no choice but to gather around the Ghost Mother, hoping to rely on her power to protect themselves. As the name suggested, the Ghost Mother was the mother of all ghosts. In other words, she was the source of all ghosts. She was an extremely special existence in the ghost forest. She could gather the power of these ghosts and explode with even more powerful combat power. Generally speaking, if an ominous mother gathered enough ghosts, it could even unleash the power of a nether-rank Yuan Ko. Therefore, when the ghosts gathered around Mother Harpy, they regained their confidence and sense of security. They felt that they could stand against the detestable sword wielder. In the past, there had been records of powerful human sword wielders entering the 100 Ghost Forest and slaughtering the ghosts. However, as long as the specters gathered around the Ghost Mother, everything would be fine. She would be able to easily kill the Ghost Mother. It seemed that this was indeed the case. After gathering a large number of ghosts, Mother Haridi, who had the strength of a top meteor Yuan Ko, encountered the female sword wielder, and it didn't take long for her to defeat her. In the end, it was the male sword wielder who managed to escape with his life. Otherwise, that hateful woman would have died at Mother Haridi's hands. After that, Haridi began to hunt down the female swordsman. The hunt went on for more than 10 days. Although the female swordsman was defeated every time, the female swordsman always managed to escape when she was about to be released from purgatory. After a few hours, the female swordsman would come back to life with full health. Worse still, Mother Haridi discovered that her opponent was becoming stronger and stronger. Her swordsmanship was also becoming more and more terrifying. At first, Mother Haridi only needed to use 40% of her strength to defeat her opponent. However, after more than 10 days, she had to use all of her strength to defeat her opponent. Therefore, Mother Haridi began to feel afraid. She gave up on hunting down the female sword wielder and began to dodge her opponent's attacks. However, the female sword wielder refused to let Ghost Mother go, and the tables were turned. Now, Ghost Mother was running away, and the female sword wielder was chasing after her. In the end, Ghost Mother had no choice but to fight to the death with the female sword wielder. Both sides brought out their most powerful attacks, and it was a battle to the death. However, this was only the beginning. When Mother Haridi died, she shared her experience with the other 11 Mother Harpies in the 100 Ghost Forest. The entire 100 Ghost Forest was divided into 12 areas, and each area was guarded by 12 different Mother Harpies. Once a Mother Haridi died, the news of her death would immediately be notified to the Mother Harpies in the other areas. At the same time, the related memories would be shared with the other Mother Harpies. After learning that one of their companions had been killed, the Mother Harpies became extremely furious, especially the Mother Harpies in the 2 surrounding areas. They immediately gathered the ghosts in their areas and charged at the enemy, wanting to use their advantage in numbers to kill the enemy. Of course, the female swordsman was no match for the 2 Harpies. Thus, another cycle began. The female swordsman kept fighting with the 2 Harpies. Although she kept losing, she was always saved at the crucial moment. When she appeared again, her strength had increased to a certain extent. This caused the 2 Harpies to be extremely afraid. After obtaining the Mother Harpies' memories, the 2 Mother Harpies naturally couldn't allow their opponent to continue killing them. As such, they immediately called for their friends and called the other 2 Mother Harpies over. As such, another cycle began. When they discovered that 4 Mother Harpies were no match for the female sword wielder, 4 Mother Harpies became 6 Mother Harpies, then 8 mother harpies. In the end, even when 11 mother harpies fought together, they still couldn't defeat their opponent. Instead, their opponent grew stronger and stronger. She was many times stronger than before. It had been 2 months since the first mother harpies died. However, if 11 mother harpies couldn't defeat their opponent, what should they do? It should be noted that the combined strength of 11 mother harpies was equivalent to a top-tier meteor warrior, Yuan Ko. As such, the mother harpies could only look deeper into the 100 Ghost Forest and call for help from their backers. In human imagination, the core area of the 100 Ghost Forest must be an extremely terrifying place. It was filled with all kinds of corpses and skulls. It was a place that could make one's hair stand on end. However, reality always exceeded human expectations. In fact, the scene in the depths of 100 Ghosts Forest was completely different. The originally blackened and charred trees were once again lush and green. The vitality of the entire forest had also been completely restored. Furthermore, the vitality of the forest was much greater than that of the forest outside. Most importantly, there were many temples in the depths of the jungle. These temples were all magnificent, and they were not in the traditional Huaxia style. Instead, they were like the traditional Indian style of brick and stone temples. During this period, there were countless shaved monks in kasayas walking between the temples. They looked gentle and peaceful, as if the light of Buddha was universal. In short, in the core area of the 100 Ghost Forest, there was no ghost energy at all. Instead, it was like a paradise that came from the Buddha. At the center of all the temples, there was a tall temple that was the most eye-catching. This temple was hundreds of meters tall and covered an area of more than 100 hectares. When people saw this temple, they couldn't help but want to kneel on the ground and sincerely offer their faith. Buddha, your disciple has something to report. In the magnificent temple, a monk in a yellow kasaya said to a being who was sitting high on a futon. His body was glowing with golden light, and he looked like a real Buddha. What's the matter? The Buddha's magnificent voice, which seemed to be able to penetrate people's hearts, rang throughout the hall. The mother harpies outside the forest of Kasayapa have reported to me that an extremely powerful sword wielder of the spiritual sword level has appeared in the forest of Kasayapa. He has been massacring the ghosts in the forest of Kasayapa. One of the mother harpies has already returned to the pure land of ultimate bliss. Now, the remaining 11 mother harpies are also in a difficult battle. Therefore, they are asking for the mercy of the Buddha to send help. You? The monk in the yellow kasaya said in a low voice. This is a little strange. Such a powerful sword wielder hasn't come to my forest of Kasayapa for more than a decade. The Buddha's voice was silent for a while. Fine. Arrange for the 24 Guardian Vajra to release these evil guests from purgatory. Yes. The disciple accepted the order and left. The Guardian Vajra was a natural guardian with a Vajra scepter. It was also one of the core forces of the Buddhist sect. Each Guardian Vajra had the strength of a nether-level Yuan Ko, and the 24 Guardian Vajra together was almost equivalent to a small part of a universe-level Yuan Ko. With such a force joining the siege against the female sword wielder, it was a matter of twice the result with half the effort. It was just that the Guardian Vajra, who represented justice and mercy, was mixed up with the gloomy mother harpies. There was an inexplicable funny feeling. No matter what, the effect of the Guardian Vajra joining the battle was very obvious. Moreover, the Guardian Vajra had secretly hidden in the void in advance. When the ghost and the female sword wielder fought fiercely, these Guardian Vajra suddenly jumped out and launched a shameful sneak attack on the female sword wielder, severely injuring her in one fell swoop. Half of her body was smashed by the Guardian Vajra's Vajra scepter. When she was finally rescued by the male sword wielder, she was almost dead. Chapter 1366. Although the Guardian Vajras thought that the woman would definitely die, heaven did not follow their wishes, nor did it follow the wishes of Buddha. The next day, when the guardian Vajra was ready to return to Buddha, the woman who should have been dead suddenly jumped out again. What followed was another confrontation that lasted for 2 months. In the end, the 24 guardian Vajras and the 11 harpies gathered together, trembling, and stayed vigilant every day. They did not know when the terrifying woman would jump out and attack them, but at this time, they were no longer the woman's opponent. They could barely maintain a state of self-defense, so in the end, they had no choice but to look at the core of the ghost forest and send a message to the great Buddha for help. Therefore, after these 2 months, the monk in the yellow kasaya rushed back again. But this time, before he could speak, Buddha took the initiative to ask, "How is it? Are my guardian Vajras back?" "No." The monk in the yellow kasaya said nervously. "Buddha, things are bad. The 24 guardian Vajras arranged by me are also trapped in the Kasaya forest. They sent a report saying that their lives are in danger. If we don't send help, they may return to the Western Paradise. This sword wielder actually has such strength. No matter. 18 Arhats, quickly come and see me." The high and mighty Gautama Buddha was extremely calm. With a slight movement of his golden fingers, 18 golden arhats instantly appeared beside him. The aura of these golden arhats was extremely strong, and each of them had the strength of a meteor stage Yuan Ko. Facing such 18 opponents, even an immortal sword wielder would have to retreat temporarily. "You guys go and send those evil guests to the reborn in paradise," Ancestral Buddha said indifferently. The 18 golden arhats immediately obeyed his orders and left. Ancestral Buddha then immersed himself in the world of Buddhist Dharma again. Gautama Buddha did not doubt the victory at all. The power that he had sent out was equivalent to the power of 3 immortal sword-tier sword-bearers. There was no reason for such a power to be defeated by a spiritual sword-tier sword-bearer. "Master, your disciple is useless. No matter what, your disciple is no match for those 18 arhat. Your disciple can't beat them. Master, please punish your disciple," Lu Shihua said to Gohan in despair. A week ago, Lu Shihua's expression was still full of hope. Ever since they entered the 100 Ghost Forest, Gohan had Lu Shihua fight head-on. Who said that it was extremely dangerous. The number of times Lu Shihua had encountered life and death situations had already exceeded 3-digit. If it were any other sword-bearer, they would have died long ago. But in the end, Gohan managed to throw Lu Shihua off. More importantly, every night, Gohan would explain to Lu Shihua the battles that happened during the day. He told Lu Shihua how he should correct and adjust his swordsmanship so that he could defeat his opponent. With the daily life and death battle experience and the guidance of an absolute master, Lu Shihua's swordsmanship began to improve rapidly in a way that even she did not expect. In the end, Lu Shihua had completely mastered the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, taught by Gohan. Only with the power of a spiritual sword wielder could she beat the 24 guardian Vajras and the 11 harpy mothers, who were equivalent to the strength of an immortal sword wielder. But when the 18 arhats appeared, Lu Shihua was no longer a match for them. Every time she went up, she would be beaten up by the 18 arhats. If it was not for the fact that Gohan had enough emperor blood, Lu Shihua was afraid that she would have to have hundreds of limbs to fight back. In fact, when she first fought against the 11 harpy mothers and the 24 guardian Vajras, Lu Shihua was in a state of defeat. But it was different at that time. After every battle, Lu Shihua could feel her swordsmanship improving. Lu Shihua knew that as long as she continued to improve, sooner or later, she would be able to defeat these difficult opponents. So Lu Shihua never felt despair. But it was different this time. After a week of fighting, although Lu Shihua's swordsmanship had improved, the improvement had become very small. It was so small that it was negligible. Unless Lu Shihua was given more than 10 years, she had no confidence that she could defeat the 18 arhat. So, Lu Shihua fell into extreme despair and apologized to Gohan. "It's not your fault. You've done very well." Gohan touched Lu Shihua's head and comforted her gently. In fact, Lu Shihua's current situation was within Gohan's expectations. Gohan had long known that it was impossible for Lu Shihua to defeat the 18 Arhats. The reason was very simple. It was because the upper limit of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven was there. Although the 9 swords of mysterious heaven was an extremely powerful set of swordsmanship, its upper limit was the level of an immortal sword wielder. In the hands of an immortal sword wielder, it might still be a very powerful set of swordsmanship. However, if a spirit sword wielder wanted to rely on the 9 swords of mysterious heaven to defeat 2 or 3 immortal sword wielder, this was something that even Gohan could not do. The 9 swords of mysterious heaven was like a gun. If held in the hands of an ordinary human, it could kill in all directions and countless people of the same kind. But if held in the hands of a mutant like Hulk, the bullet would become a tool to scratch an itch. Only by replacing it with a more lethal missile could it help Hulk kill more powerful opponent. Not to mention that the 9 swords of mysterious heaven was originally not very suitable for Lu Shihua's own personality. What was really suitable for Lu Shihua was the mysterious lady of the 9th heaven sword technique at the peak of Kunlun. It was impossible for Lu Shihua to practice the 9 swords of mysterious heaven to the peak. In fact, this kind of thing had also happened to Gohan. During the battle with the immortal sword wielder in the 8th city assembly in the game, Gohan had already discovered that the 9 swords of mysterious heaven was not enough. In the 8 Academy assembly, this kind of thing became more obvious, and when he went to Shanghai Pass, the drawbacks of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven completely broke out. Faced with such a predicament, Gohan's solution was to create his own sword art, Chaos Sword Art. Starting from the first move, Chaos Sky Splitter, the second move, Chaos Flying Immortal, the third move, Chaos Stars, the fourth move, Chaos Golden Lotus, the fifth move, Chaos Legend, and the sixth move, Chaos Unification, were all powerful sword arts that Gohan had created based on his lifetime of battles. It was also by relying on the emergence of the Chaos Sword technique that Gohan was able to defeat the immortal sword wielder as a spirit sword wielder, and even the 100-level Yuan Ko. At this time, the 9 swords of mysterious heaven had become very useless for Gohan, unless he was dealing with some extremely weak Yuan Ko. Gohan would only use his 9 swords of mysterious heaven when he disdained to use the Chaos Sword technique. Otherwise, when facing the real masters, Gohan would directly use the Chaos Sword technique to fight the enemy. However, Gohan could also see that although Lu Shihua had completely mastered the 9 swords of mysterious heaven under his coercion, his own talent in swordsmanship was far beyond that of an ordinary person, but it was far from being as amazing as Gohan himself. If Lu Shihua wanted to spontaneously create his own swordsmanship, he would need to accumulate too little experience. After all, Lu Shihua's entire life had been advancing according to the path that Gohan had planned. When Gohan issued an order, Lu Shihua immediately went to carry it out. He did not have enough subjective initiative. Just like this training, all the steps of Lu Shihua were carried out under Gohan's arrangement. In this way, Lu Shihua's swordsmanship did improve, but he never thought about how he should do it. This was obviously a huge shortcoming for creating a new swordsmanship that belonged to him. What was worse was that Lu Shihua, who grew up through this kind of training, might be able to become a strong fighter, but if he wanted to take over Gohan's career and become the appointed successor of Gohan in the future, this was far from enough. Lu Shihua must have his own ideas and wisdom. Therefore, Gohan patted Lu Shihua's head and said, "Good disciple, Master will give you 3 months of time. In these 3 months you must cleanly kill off these things like Hariti, Vajra, Arhat, and the like. However, during this period I won't give you any advice or help. You'll have to rely on your own judgment and plans to act. Whether you fight head-on, lure the tiger away from the mountain, or split up and disband, it's all up to your own will. But you must remember one thing, and that is that you absolutely cannot die. If you die at the hands of an opponent, then perhaps Master will save you, but your trial this time will be over. Master will immediately take you back to Yuzhang City, and from then on, Master will not teach you anything else. It will be considered that you have successfully graduated from Master's tutelage. Do you understand what Master is saying? Yes, Master. Lu Shihua nodded blankly. She had to rely on her own intelligence and strength to defeat these seemingly invincible opponents. This was something that Lu Shihua had never thought of doing. Lu Shihua could only feel her head aching. For the next week, Lu Shihua was immersed in thinking about how to use wisdom to defeat the opponent. After the opponents found out that Lu Shihua had not appeared for a week, they obviously let down their guard. After all, the 18 Arhats were too powerful. They took it for granted that their strength had completely made Lu Shihua despair, and that he had already left the ghost forest. Therefore, the 18 Arhats, who thought highly of themselves and had never suffered a loss in Lu Shihua's hands, no longer adhered to the strategic policy of huddling together. Instead, they split up to search for Lu Shihua. As a result, on the first day after they separated, one of the 18 Arhats died under Lu Shihua's sneak attack. When the other Arhats received the news and rushed over, Lu Shihua had already disappeared without a trace. Obviously, Lu Shihua had found a way to win. Chapter 1367. Holy **T. Even the 18 Arhats could not help but curse at this time. In the past month, the 18 Arhats had become 12 Arhat. 6 of them had returned to the dimensional vortex forever. The opponent this time was extremely difficult to deal with, and his sense of smell was extremely sharp. The 18 Arhats were certain that the other party was still in the 100 Ghosts forest, but they could not find the other party's exact location no matter what. The 18 Arhats had clearly sent out many ghosts with excellent concealment skills to carry out a carpet search of the entire 100 Ghosts forest, but the other party's spiritual sense was terrifyingly sharp. He could always avoid the ghost's search at the most appropriate time. If he really could not avoid it, the opponent would launch a sudden attack and eliminate all the ghosts before reinforcements arrived, disappearing without a trace again. At this time, the best solution seemed to be to let the 18 Arhats stay in different locations in the ghost forest. When the ghosts discovered the opponent, they would immediately rush over and stall the opponent until the main force arrived. At first, the 18 Arhats did this, and succeeded in catching the opponent's tail several times. However, when the rest of the Arhats arrived, the Arhat in charge of stalling the opponent was already killed in an extremely short period of time. That was how 6 of the 18 Arhats were finished. After that, the 18 Arhats no longer dared to play tricks like splitting up. They gathered all their forces together, deeply afraid that they would give the opponent a chance to split up and attack. This way, although the Arhats' lives were guaranteed, it was completely impossible to catch the slippery opponent. The two sides had been in a stalemate for 2 weeks. Master Taming Dragon, I've made a huge discovery. Just as the remaining 12 Arhats were feeling frustrated about how to deal with the troublesome opponent, a guardian suddenly rushed over. What's the big discovery? Arhat Taming Dragon asked in surprise. Just now, a ghost under the ogres reported that she found a very well-hidden human camp in the forest of Kasayapa. There's an ordinary person living in the camp. The ordinary person is 70 to 80% similar to the female sword bearer. It's very likely that he's the female sword bearer's relative. If we can capture this ordinary person, we can definitely force the female sword bearer to come out and fight us, the guardian said excitedly. There's such a thing. The Taming Dragon Arhat was delighted, but then he asked in confusion, that's not right. Don't ordinary humans hide in their base cities and don't dare to come out? Ordinary humans have never appeared in the Kasayapa forest. Why would ordinary humans appear in our Kasayapa forest? Is this information reliable? Absolutely reliable. The omniscient mother's subordinates noticed that the swordswoman would appear in that area every day when they were tracking her. She felt that something important was hidden there, so she sent a large number of omniscient mother's subordinates to search the area. In the end, she discovered that the swordswoman had hollowed out the trunk of a 1,000-year-old tree and built a temporary camp inside it. The swordswoman's relatives were hiding inside the tree. If we hadn't searched that area, we wouldn't have found the swordswoman's temporary camp. All right. Arhut Taming Dragon clenched his fists excitedly. At the same time, he began to gather all the Arhuts, Guardian Vajra, and Ghost Mother, and began to carefully surround the tree hole from all directions. The whole process was very smooth. The Arhuts did not spend any energy and successfully surrounded the temporary camp. Do it. Capture him alive. The Taming Dragon Arhut waved his hand, and everyone rushed towards the tree hole. In just 2 or 3 moves, the whole ancient tree was shaved off, revealing Lu Yin with a surprised look on his face. Arhut Taming Dragon nodded and said to himself with a smile, I can't be wrong. Judging by his appearance, he must be the swordswoman's younger brother. Arhut Taming Dragon nodded and said to himself with a smile, since the other party was an ordinary person who could not even truss a chicken, Arhut Taming Dragon was not on guard at all. Who are you? What are you doing? Lu Yin looked at Arhut Taming Dragon and asked in horror. Ba. I am Arhut Taming Dragon, the head of the 18 Arhuts under Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. Today, please come with us. Arhut Taming Dragon stretched out his hand and was about to grab the terrified Lu Yin. However, as soon as Arhut Taming Dragon's palm touched the corner of Lu Yin's clothes, a deadly sword aura suddenly surged out from Arhut Taming Dragon's lower body. The Taming Dragon Arhut was caught off guard and was directly stabbed in the key of his crotch by this deadly sword chi. Every Arhut has their own Arhut golden body. This Arhut golden body is like a sword wielder's personal shield. Unless the energy of the Arhut golden body is exhausted, it is impossible to hurt an Arhut. However, it is different from the sword wielder's personal shield. The sword wielder's personal shield has no weakness and can easily protect the entire body of the sword wielder. However, the Arhut golden body has its own Achilles heel. Although this Achilles heel is very small, it is the most vulnerable part of an Arhut's body. Its defense strength is not even comparable to that of an ordinary dragon rank Yuan Ko. It is the biggest weakness of an Arhut. An Arhut Taming Dragon's Achilles heel is his own little brother. At the same time, the sword aura that pierced into Arhut Taming Dragon's Achilles heel was not an ordinary sword aura, but the fiercest move of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, Sword Dipper. Sword Dipper is a sword move whose power cannot be estimated by conventional means, because the power of this move depends on how much sword aura the user instills into the sword move. The more sword aura instills, the more powerful the sword move will be. As an assassination move that Lu Shihua has carefully prepared, it is also the move that Lu Shihua is most proficient in. This move has poured a lot of Lu Shihua's sword aura into it, and it can be said to be a move that puts the opponent on the brink of death. If this move failed, then the only thing that awaited Lu Shihua was failure. Fortunately, Lu Shihua succeeded. This sword successfully pierced into Arhut Taming Dragon's body, and then all the sword aura exploded from within Arhut Taming Dragon's body. Even the strongest of the 18 Arhuts, Arhut Taming Dragon could not withstand such a terrifying damage from Sword Dipper. However, after this sword pierced into Arhut Taming Dragon's body, Arhut Taming Dragon did not seem to suffer much damage. His body was still intact, and his body was emitting a dazzling golden light. Ba. May I ask, benefactor, what is your name? Arhut Taming Dragon suddenly put his palms together and asked Lu Shihua. My name is Lu Shihua. Lu Shihua replied faintly. Ba. I didn't expect benefactor to use your little brother as bait. It was Arhut Taming Dragon's miscalculation. However, Arhut Taming Dragon is very curious. How did benefactor know where my Achilles heel is? Even among the 18 Arhuts, there are only a few who know where my Achilles heel is. Arhut Taming Dragon asked curiously. It was your good brother, Arhut taming tiger, who told me. Lu Shihua glanced at Arhut taming dragon. Arhut taming tiger was one of the 6 Arhuts who died in Lu Shihua's hands. He wanted to use this information in exchange for his life. Unfortunately, I lied to him. What do you think? Do you hate him for betraying you? No. Arhut taming dragon shook his head. He actually wanted to return to Western Paradise very much. He just wanted to help me. After saying this, Arhut taming dragon's body began to crack like a piece of cracked land. Finally, it turned into pieces of minced meat that fell to the ground and was absorbed by the dimensional vortex that appeared. Everyone quickly attacked. There is not much sword essence left in this woman's body. Come, avenge taming dragon. Seeing their good friend return to Western Paradise, the surrounding Arhuts suddenly burst into flames of anger. At the same time, they also realized that after using this move, there would not be much sword essence left in Lu Shihua's body. This was their best chance to kill Lu Shihua. Let's go. Lu Shihua's expression suddenly changed. He immediately picked up his brother, Lu Yin, and wanted to rush out of the encirclement. However, these Arhuts and Vajras who had finally caught Lu Shihua were not willing to let him go just like that. In an instant, a fierce chase began between the two sides. Because Lu Shihua was carrying Lu Yin, his speed of escape was far slower than the speed of his opponent's pursuit. The situation that Lu Shihua was facing became extremely dangerous. Brother, run! Lu Shihua led Lu Yin into a jungle. In the next second, 2 maglev motorcycles rushed out of the bushes. Lu Yin was riding one of them and quickly fled to the periphery of the ghost forest, while Lu Shihua was speeding in a completely different direction. Obviously, this was the escape route that Lu Shihua had planned long ago. He hid the 2 maglev motorcycles that were already in a state of activation in a bush, so that Lu Yin and himself could escape using the 2 maglev motorcycles as soon as possible. What should we do? Seeing the 2 opponents escape separately, the pursuing Arhuts hesitated for a moment. They did not know whether they should focus on chasing Lu Shihua or split up to chase after Lu Yin. After a brief hesitation, the Arhuts quickly made a decision. Split up and chase after her. The reason was simple. In previous battles, the Arhuts had deeply experienced the strength and slyness of this woman named Lu Shihua. Without Lu Yin, who was a burden, they might let her escape again. Therefore, the Arhuts finally decided to split up to chase after Lu Yin, who was relatively easy to catch. Even if they did not catch up to Lu Shihua, they could use Lu Shihua's brother to lure Lu Shihua into a trap. Chapter 1368. The maglev motorcycle that Lu Yin was riding was so fast that even Guardian Vajra and Mother Haridi might not be able to catch up with it. Only an Arhut could catch up with it. So, in the end, the cloth bag Arhut separated from the crowd and chased after the maglev motorcycle, while the rest of the Arhuts continued to chase after Lu Shihua's maglev motorcycle. Although Lu Shihua's maglev motorcycle had reached its maximum speed, it was still difficult to escape from the Arhuts' pursuit. Finally, 10 minutes later, the angry Arhuts caught up with her. A shockwave from the Arhuts completely destroyed the maglev motorcycle that Lu Shihua was riding. Lu Shihua fell heavily to the ground like a sack and lay there motionless. Bright red blood quickly soaked a small area of the ground. We finally caught her. The ear-digging Arhuts that surrounded Lu Shihua were both excited and sad. In order to catch this cunning opponent, 7 Arhuts had died. Now there were only 11 Arhuts left. This made the 18 Arhuts, who were usually as close as brothers, very sad. Everyone, be careful. This woman is full of tricks. Maybe she has some conspiracy waiting for us. Let's use the dragnet to capture her. The pondering Arhut said. The rest of the Arhuts nodded at the same time with lingering fear in their hearts. Countless golden lights shot out from their hands, intertwining in the air to form a large net made of these golden lights. Then the net wrapped around Lu Shihua, who was lying on the ground, and pulled her body into the air. After seeing Lu Shihua's condition, The pondering Arhat was the first to feel that something was wrong and said, "Strange. Why is this woman covered in blood from head to toe? Such a small injury should have no effect on her." This was because Lu Shihua's body seemed to be too fragile. Just falling off the maglev motorcycle had seriously injured her. She was covered in blood from head to toe. This was completely different from the woman who had fought them relentlessly for a month. "Look, there's something wrong with this woman's face. Why do I feel like she looks like a man?" Another happy Arhat also noticed that something was wrong and said. At the same time, more and more strange things about Lu Shihua were also discovered by these Arhat. "This is a man, not a woman." The pondering Arhat finally reacted and exclaimed loudly. "Wait, I'm sure that the one we've been fighting for the past few months is a woman. How did it suddenly turn into a man?" said the ear-digging Arhat in shock. "No, if that guy is really a woman, and the one we're catching is a man, doesn't that mean that the cloth bag Arhat is chasing the guy is?" The pondering Arhat's expression suddenly changed. Only then did he realize that the other party had probably switched clothes the moment they went into the grass. The one who was wearing Lu Yin's clothes was Lu Shihua, and the one in front of him was actually Lu Yin. If that was really the case, then Cloth Bag Arhat, who had chased after Lu Yin all by himself, should be facing the terrifying Lu Shihua instead. With this realization, the Arhats immediately carried Lu Yin and prepared to rescue the Cloth Bag Arhat. But it was too late. When they were about to set off, everyone's golden Arhats felt a violent fluctuation, as if something important had left them. At this moment, all the Arhats had realized that the Cloth Bag Arhat had probably died in the hands of Lu Shihua. This guy actually used her own brother as bait to trick us into splitting up. Is she still human? Does she not want her brother's life anymore? Said the ear-digging Arhat with a face full of grief and indignation. No, she has already understood one thing, that is, we will never hurt her biological brother. Instead, we will try our best to save her brother's life, because we will use her brother's life to force her to show herself. The pondering Arhat assumed a contemplative posture and said, "No, I don't care that much. I want to use her brother's life to avenge Xianglong and Cloth Bag." The most reckless Arhat, the ear-digging Arhat, suddenly took out his weapon and smashed it towards Lu Yin's head. It was so fast that even the pondering Arhat, who was holding Lu Yin, did not have time to react. Lu Yin's head was about to be smashed to pieces by the ear-digging Arhat. Suddenly, a void door opened in the air and a crystal-clear, jade-like hand reached out from it. It grabbed Lu Yin's body into the void in time, and finally disappeared without a trace. "There's an immortal sword wielder." The Arhats were stunned for a while before they came to their senses. It was an immortal sword-rank sword wielder who had opened the door to the void and rescued Lu Yin. No wonder this woman dared to throw her brother to us. So she knew that an immortal sword wielder would come to save him, said the ear-digging Arhat, gritting his teeth. "That's not important. What's important is that there's an immortal sword wielder hiding behind her all this time. Then we're in danger. If that immortal sword wielder attacks again, with only 10 of us left, we will definitely not be a match for the 2 of them. We must retreat immediately." The pondering Arhat thought of the opponent that might be hiding behind this, and said worriedly, "There's no need to panic." Among the 18 Arhats, the long-browed Arhat, who was known for his wisdom, said, "If there really was an immortal sword wielder behind her, I'm afraid we would already be dead. She wouldn't have to waste so much effort to tangle with us. I've heard that humans have an ability called the Void Hand, which can rescue people from thousands of miles away through the void door. I'm afraid we've encountered such an void hand." "Then what do you mean, long-browed? Do we still want to be in a stalemate with them?" asked the pondering Arhat. "No." The long-browed Arhat shook his head cautiously. "Since we've discovered the existence of an immortal sword wielder, we can't continue in this stalemate. Immediately report what happened here to the Buddha, and let the Buddha decide our next course of action." What a good disciple! She actually used me, her master. Several dozen kilometers away from the battlefield, Gu Han fed Lu Yin 1/20th of a drop of sovereign blood to him before tossing him onto a sandy ground. At the same time, he shook his head in annoyance as he muttered to himself, "You're too weak." And the truth was just as Guhan had said. He had been used by his good disciple. The reason why Lu Shihua dared to let Lu Yin help him lure away the main force of the Arhats was because he knew that at this time, Guhan must be hiding in the void, observing the entire situation. And before the trial began, Guhan also promised Lu Shihua that he would do his best to protect Lu Yin's life so that Lu Shihua could train without any worries. It was precisely because of Guhan's guarantee that Lu Shihua knew that his brother would never encounter any fatal danger. At the last moment, Guhan would definitely save Lu Yin. Thinking about it carefully, wasn't this Lu Shihua using Guhan? Not bad. Not bad. My good disciple, this is my good disciple. However, Guhan, who had been used, did not have an angry expression. On the contrary, he was a little happy. Because in Guhan's view, this was a huge improvement for Lu Shihua. Although Lu Shihua's personality was very good, she had the temperament of a Virgin Mary in her bones. This did not mean that she was a Virgin Mary, but a true Virgin Mary. Therefore, she had many misgivings when doing many things. It was very difficult for such a person to achieve the ability required to freeze the cold. Now that Lu Shihua had begun to learn to use Guhan, and even his own brother, it showed that Lu Shihua's heart had gradually begun to let go of these things. The nature of a saint was gradually weakening. Lu Shihua believed that it would not be long before Lu Shihua could become a qualified leader. This was what Guhan was happy about. There are only 10 of the 18 Arhats left, and only 5 of the 11 Harpies are left. There are not many Guardian Vajras left. Now, the strength of the opponent can no longer form a crushing force against Lu Shihua. Now, Lu Shihua no longer needs to cower and hide. It seems that it doesn't even need 3 months. In just a little more than a month, Lu Shihua can complete my task. After thinking about the existing strength of both sides, Guhan said with a sigh. Ah! While Guhan was thinking about these things, Lu Yin, who had been casually thrown aside by Guhan, suddenly let out a series of painful moans. This made Guhan feel extremely strange, because Guhan had just fed Lu Yin 1/20th of a drop of imperial blood. For ordinary humans, this was a special medicine that was more effective than any medical treatment. At this time, Lu Yin should be feeling extremely comfortable, and all the injured parts should be recovering quickly. However, when Guhan looked at Lu Yin, he saw that Lu Yin was constantly howling in pain. His forehead was covered with sweat, and a large amount of blood was gushing out of the already bloody wounds. Admittedly, the situation in front of him was something that Guhan had not expected at all. If the blood continued to flow like this, Lu Yin would probably die on the spot, and even Guhan would not be able to stop it. This was a situation that Guhan absolutely could not accept, because Guhan had already guaranteed Lu Shihua's safety. Not to mention the fact that Lu Yin's death would cause Guhan to be unable to fulfill his promise. When Lu Shihua found out about his brother's death, he would fall into a terrible situation. Guhan believed that Lu Shihua would not blame him, his master. On the other hand, Lu Shihua would blame himself and take all the blame on himself. This was because Lu Shihua had decided to use his brother as bait. If Lu Yin died, Lu Shihua would have an undeniable responsibility, and Lu Shihua would definitely live in his own mental nightmare for the rest of his life. The disciple that Guhan had painstakingly trained would probably be completely crippled. Damn! You can't die. Guhan patted Lu Yin's face hard, and then dripped a drop of imperial blood into Lu Yin's mouth. Although Guhan had vaguely guessed that it was the imperial blood that had caused all this. However, now that the med bay had lost its function, the only thing that Guhan could use to heal Lu Yin was the imperial blood. Chapter 1369. Just how much sovereign blood does this guy's body consume? After Gohan fed a bottle of 100 drops of sovereign blood into Lu Yin's stomach, although Lu Yin's injuries had improved, he was still bleeding continuously. 200 drops, 300 drops, 400 drops. When Gohan fed all of the 100 cubic centimeters of sovereign blood into Lu Yin's mouth, all of Lu Yin's wounds were completely healed, and his aura gradually calmed down. However, at the same time, Lu Yin's mouth began to change. The tooth on the leftmost side of his upper jaw began to grow rapidly, and soon exceeded the size of a normal tooth, protruding out of his lips. This crazy tooth grew to a length of 1 meter, much longer than an elephant's tusk, before finally stopping growing. At the same time, Lu Yin slowly opened his eyes, and just as he was about to say something, his body was pierced by his own huge tooth, and the pain caused Lu Yin's hair to stand on end. Sir Gohan. After discovering that his teeth had changed, Lu Yin was extremely terrified, and did not dare to open and close his mouth again. He could only communicate with Gohan through the barely distinguishable sounds coming from his throat. I don't know. Gohan shook his head, then gently stroked Lu Yin's ivory-like tooth, and said in surprise, "Strange, the feel of your tooth is completely different from a normal tooth. Rather than saying it feels like a tooth, it feels more like a sword's blade." Whoa. I don't want to. Lu Yin panicked, and immediately stretched out his hands to touch the tooth. In the end, a miraculous thing happened again. When Lu Yin's hands touched the tooth, Lu Yin did not use any strength at all, and the tooth fell off by itself. The tooth that fell off began to slowly change in Lu Yin's hands, and finally, after more than 10 seconds, it turned into a curved crescent sword. What happened? How did my tooth turn into a sword? Lu Yin asked in confusion as he looked at the sword in his hand. However, when he held the hilt, Lu Yin could clearly feel a bloodline connection. This sword had indeed grown out of his body. Could it be? Upon seeing this scene, Gohan's eyes lit up slightly. He immediately grabbed Lu Shihua's wrist and probed his sword essence into Lu Yin's body at the same time. He then nodded slightly and said, "It seems like I guessed right. Your body already has your own sword essence, and the number of these sword essences has reached more than 100 quarks. Congratulations, Lu Yin, you've become an ancient sword-tier swordsman." What? I've become a sword-bearer? Lu Yin was completely stunned. He looked at Gohan in disbelief, and could not help but ask Gohan again, "Lord Gohan, you're not joking with me, right? Have I really become a sword-bearer?" There's no mistake. I can already feel the existence of the purple mansion and the sword mark in your body. You've already become a real sword wielder. Gohan confirmed once again. I've become a sword wielder. Ha 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 ha. I've become a sword wielder. After a short moment of silence, Lu Yin jumped up from the ground like a madman. He waved the curved sword in his hand like a madman, constantly repeating the phrase, "I've become a sword wielder." Ever since they met Gohan, the Lu siblings' lives had become completely different. They had originally been poor children living in the slums, but now they had become upper-class people living on Mount Emperor. More importantly, Lu Yin's sister, Lu Shihua, had become the personal disciple of Yuzhong City's Sword Pavilion Master. In the end, Lu Shihua even took over the position of Yuzhong City's Sword Pavilion Master with unprecedented status. She became one of the 2 noblest people in Yuzhong City. It could be said that Lu Yin had ascended to the heavens in a single step. In the blink of an eye, he had become the son of an influential family in Yuzhong City. However, Lu Yin had not been happy all these years. Although he had a sister who loved him and tried her best to protect him, Lu Yin had been sentenced to death on the path of a sword wielder. This was because Lu Yin's natural sword essence was only a pitiful little bit. This meant that unless Lu Yin was like Gohan, who could obtain acquired sword essence through the game, Lu Yin would never be able to meet the requirement of 100 quarks of sword essence to become a sword wielder. However, there was only one Gohan in the world. Of course, Lu Yin could not replicate Gohan's legend. Therefore, in these 3 years, Lu Yin had never been happy. He was constantly thinking about how to become a real sword wielder. This was especially so when Lu Yin had followed Lu Shihua and Gu Han to participate in this special training. He had seen his sister's strength undergo an earth-shattering change in just a few months, and the jealousy in his heart had become even more intense. Lu Yin had once sworn to the heavens that if he could become a sword-bearer, he would pay any price that Lu Yin had to pay. Therefore, when Lu Yin heard from Gohan that he had become a sword wielder, he became extremely crazy. This was completely understandable. I'm afraid it's not a good thing for this child to become a sword wielder. Gu Han frowned as he looked at Lu Yin, who seemed to have gone mad, and said with a serious expression. From Lu Yin's current behavior, it could be seen that Lu Yin's heart was too greedy and utilitarian. If one day he could not control his desires, who knew what would happen to Lu Yin in the end? More importantly, the current Gohan did not understand Lu Yin's condition at all. He had never heard of a human's teeth that could grow more than a meter long and turn into a curved sword. This was definitely not something that a real human could do. Lu Yin and Lu Shihua's background was probably not simple. Gohan even suspected that Lu Yin was not a real sword wielder, even though he did have sword essence in his body. Lu Yin, sit here, Gohan said to the crazy Lu Yin in a strict tone. When he heard Gohan's stern voice, Lu Yin immediately calmed down. His crazy expression calmed down and he sat next to Buhan in shame. He lowered his head and said to Gohan, "Lord Gohan, please forgive me. I was too impulsive." "That's no problem. I can completely understand your feelings. This is nothing," Gohan said lightly, "but I think you know in your heart that your current situation is very strange. You don't seem like a real sword wielder. For the sake of your future and safety, I have some things to ask you." "Lord Gohan, please ask. I will definitely tell you everything I know." When he heard Gohan say this, Lu Yin's forehead immediately became covered with a few drops of sweat. He also realized that his sword wielder was too strange. He had never heard of a sword wielder's sword lady growing out of their own teeth. "Let me ask you, can your consciousness enter your Zifu and see the sword scars in your Zifu?" When Gohan's voice fell, Lu Yin immediately entered into a meditative state. After a while, he opened his eyes and nodded to Gohan. "Yes, I can see my own sword scars. They are floating in my Zifu." "That's good." Gohan asked Lu Yin some other questions. They were all about the specific characteristics of a sword wielder. In the end, Lu Yin's answers were the same. Lu Yin had all the characteristics of a normal sword wielder. From the looks of it, Lu Yin was indeed a true sword wielder. "Last question." Gohan narrowed his eyes and asked, "Can you release your sword lady now? Can you change from sword form to sword lady form?" "I'll try." Lu Yin nodded excitedly. Under Gu Han's guidance, he tried to release his sword maiden, but the situation was different from that of a normal sword wielder. No matter how Lu Yin tried to command it, the sword maiden in his hand could not be released. It just sat quietly in Lu Yin's hand like a normal sword. "Lord Gohan? Why is it like this? Am I still a real sword wielder?" Lu Yin asked Gohan in fear. What he was most worried about was hearing from Gohan that he was not a real sword wielder. "You should still be a sword wielder. However, because your sword lady grew out of your own body, she does not have her own soul. When you can inject your sword lady with her own soul, you can become a real sword wielder," Gohan said with a smile. Although Gohan's words seemed to make sense, it was actually just an answer that Gohan made up. However, Lu Yin obviously took Gohan's words seriously. He began to seriously think about how to inject a soul into his sword lady. "You don't need to think about this problem. It is not a big problem that your sword lady does not have a soul. You can be like your sister and me, become a sword wielder and use your own body to fight. This way, it will not be a problem whether the sword lady can be released or not. Yes, Lord Gohan. Lu Yin understands. Lu Yin nodded obediently. However, from his hesitant eyes, it could be seen that Lu Yin had not given up on the idea of adding a soul to his sword lady. Buddha has spoken. He wants us to return to the Bukong temple immediately and not stay in the forest of Kasayapa any longer, the long-browed Arhat said to the other Arhats. The other Arhats immediately heaved a long sigh of relief. In the absence of 8 Arhats, the remaining 10 Arhats were definitely not a match for that woman. If they continued to stay in the forest of Kasayapa, they were afraid that only death would await them. However, because they did not have the approval of Buddha, they did not have the courage to return to the Bukong temple. Now that the ancestral Buddha had spoken, they could finally return safely. However, at this time, these happy Arhats did not know that this was only one step on the road to death. Chapter 1370. That night, the rest of the Guardian Vajras and Arhats directly left all the Haridi behind and sneaked back to the core area of the forest of Kasayapa. The reason why they had to sneak around at night was that they were afraid that their whereabouts would be exposed to the terrible woman. But in the end, their worries became reality. Although everyone was on high alert during the escape, when a piercingly cold sword chi suddenly pierced out from a tree and killed the ear-digging Arhat, the careful and hidden escape involuntarily turned into a mad dash. Lu Shihua alone launched a merciless chase against a total of more than 20 opponents. The weaker Guardian Vajras were the first to be unlucky and became sacrifices under Lu Shihua's sword. When all the Guardian Vajras returned to Elysium, it was the turn of the remaining 9 Arhats. The 9 Arhats also realized that simply escaping would probably lead to death, so in the end, the 9 Arhats gathered together again and no longer ran away. After killing all the Guardian Vajras, Lu Shihua probably felt that the remaining Arhats could no longer pose a threat to him, so he simply walked out of the depths of the forest. The two sides saw each other's faces clearly under the moonlight. Without any nonsense, the battle between the two sides began in such a simple and fierce manner. On one side, there were the 9 Arhats who cooperated with each other like brothers. On the other side, there was Lu Shihua, who was silent and full of murderous intent. This was a battle that didn't seem exciting at all, because both sides had directly used their trump cards, and every single one of them was a life-risking skill. Apart from the stench of blood that permeated the entire forest, there was nothing else worthy of praise. As time went by, both sides had reached the limit of their abilities. Lu Shihua's personal shield had less than 20% energy left. However, the Arhats were not much better. 3 Arhats had died under Lu Shihua's sword, and the remaining 6 Arhats were dyed bright red with blood. Venerable ones, it seems that there is no way for us to return to the Bukong temple, but we can't disgrace the name of Buddha in front of the demons. Let's fight to the death. The remaining 6 Arhats understood in their hearts that their side had already been defeated. The 6 of them were definitely no match for Lu Shihua. But at this time, the Arhats had already let go of all their other worries and planned to fight to the death. Seeing the attitude of the 6 Arhats, Lu Shihua tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. He knew that the final moment of this training had arrived. As long as he could successfully withstand the attacks of the remaining 6 Arhats, he would be able to complete the task given to him by his master. Just as the final battle was about to begin, something strange happened. A gigantic void gate suddenly opened up in the sky. A figure that looked like a Buddha walked out of the void gate, shining with a golden light that illuminated the entire night sky as bright as day. "Greetings, Buddha." Seeing the appearance of this Buddha statue, the remaining 6 Arhats immediately knelt in front of it excitedly and called it Buddha. "Lady Benefactor, since my Arhats have already escaped, why are you still chasing after them? Why don't you follow this poor monk back and study the Dharma painstakingly so that you can achieve the Mahayana Buddhahood in the future?" Buddha said in a magnificent voice. Let's go. The moment he saw this Buddha appear, Lu Shihua felt a power that could only be felt from Yuan Ko at the great desolate realm. Lu Shihua didn't want to talk nonsense with this Buddha at all. She immediately turned around and left because she knew very well that she was no match for this Buddha. Lady Benefactor, you have hurt my Buddhist Vajra Arhat. You are already plagued with karma. Why don't you follow this poor monk back and let this poor monk purify you? As soon as the Buddha's voice fell, 8 Buddha's palms grabbed towards Lu Shihua from all directions like bulldozers. Lu Shihua gritted her teeth and sent out a sword energy, wanting to shatter one of the Buddha's palms. However, Lu Shihua's invincible sword energy, which even an Arhat couldn't withstand, had no effect on the Buddha's palms. It was as if it had hit the hardest object in the world. It didn't even leave a trace on the Buddha's palms. Master! Seeing this scene, Lu Shihua had no other choice but to shout helplessly. Who is bullying my precious disciple? As Lu Shihua shouted, another void gate opened up. The 8 Buddha's palms grabbed Lu Shihua and pulled her into the void. After a while, the void gate opened up in front of the Buddha. Lu Shihua, who had been acting almighty just now, was now like an obedient kitten. She followed behind a man and walked out of the void. Lady Benefactor, you finally showed up. Seeing Gohan appear, the Buddha's face didn't show any surprise. It was obvious that he had already expected Gohan's existence. I wouldn't dare. I've been bothering you in your hall for the past few days. Gohan said. It doesn't matter. It's just that you've made me unable to sleep for the past few days. I can't even free myself to save my poor disciples. You and I have to settle this score. Buddha's originally compassionate face instantly turned sorrowful and bitter. After hearing the conversation between the two, the Arhats, who had been reduced from 18 to 6, finally understood why the Buddha hadn't come to their rescue after fighting so hard for so long. It turned out that the Buddha was also restrained by the other party in the Bukong temple. That's fine. Since the juniors are done with their duels, let us 2 old fellows fight. Gohan didn't care. He didn't take the Buddha's threat seriously at all, even though the other party was a flood-level Yuan Ko. When Gohan was at the spiritual sword level, he had killed 3 flood-level Yuan Ko. Now that he was at the immortal sword level, killing another flood level was no big deal. What a joke. You're just a junior. You've only lived for more than 20 years. This poor monk has lived for God knows how many tens of thousands of years. What kind of old guy are you? The Buddha said disdainfully. Lu Shihua and the remaining 6 Arhats watched the duel between the 2 top powerhouses in the sky nervously. Although the Arhats could already see that the man in the sky was just an immortal sword wielder, it was reasonable to say that he could not be compared to the Gautama Buddha. But for some reason, the aura that the 6 Arhats felt from this man was no less than their great Buddha. I say, Gohan, can you be a little more shameless? It's not you who's been facing this old bald donkey for the past few days, it's us 3 unlucky sisters. Suddenly, a clear voice rang out in the air. The void was opened again. 3 tall and beautiful sword maidens jumped out of the void. The one in the lead glared at Gohan with dissatisfaction. You're all my sword maidens. It's the same if you're there as if I'm there. There's no difference. Gohan said with a smile. These 3 sisters were naturally the celestial slaying, celestial ending, and celestial trapping sisters. The appearance of the celestial slaying sisters successfully broke the tense atmosphere. The moment the celestial slaying sisters appeared, the Buddha fixed his gaze on the celestial slaying sisters. The Buddha's bronze-like face showed an expression of disbelief. He sized up the celestial slaying sisters again and again. Celestial Ending, who had the worst temper, was extremely annoyed. She opened her mouth and scolded the Buddha. Ksitigarbha, you don't even recognize me. Do you have to stare at me like that? Amitba. So it really is Celestial Ending. This little monk pays his respects. The glittering golden Buddha instantly lost his imposing manner and spoke to the celestial exterminating sword in a courteous manner. Is that how you greet me? Who are you trying to scare with your golden bodhisattva body? Celestial ending sword said unhappily. The high and mighty Buddha hesitated for a moment. His golden body, which was several times larger than Ultraman's, began to shrink rapidly. Finally, it turned into a bald man wearing a simple black kasaya. This is the true body of the Buddha. The 6 arhats on the ground looked at each other. This was the first time in their lives that they had seen the true body of the Buddha they believed in. Buddha, my ass. He's just a bodhisattva. Since when does a bodhisattva have the guts to call himself the Buddha? Aren't you afraid that old guy Tathagata will slap you to death if he hears you? Celestial ending sword mocked the 6 arhats. Celestial ending sword is right. Buddha is just a name that my disciples made up. I have always been the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva of Buddhism. The position of the Buddha is not something that I can covet, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva said with a smile. So you are Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. This Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva had a bit of fame among Yuan Ko. He had once followed Vairocana to participate in the Alps War. However, following the defeat of Mahavairocana, this Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva disappeared without a trace and never appeared in front of the world again. Who would have thought that he was hiding in this 100 Ghosts forest and became the master of this forest? It is indeed me. After the war 100 years ago, I was seriously injured and could not return to Spirited Mountain. I could only recuperate in this Kasayapa forest. I mean 100 Ghosts forest. It has been a few 100 years. I wonder how Spirited Mountain is doing now. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva said with a sigh. However, looking at how he moved freely and looked like Ling, Gohan did not think that he was seriously injured at all. It was obvious that this Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva must have seen that Vairocana was heavily injured and could no longer maintain his position as the Buddha, so he secretly hid in the 100 Ghosts forest and secretly called himself the Buddha to satisfy his craving. Since these are all friends of Goddess Jueshian, I won't argue with them. You can all come to my Bukong temple and stay there for a few days. I can be a good host, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva said with a face full of smiles. The tense atmosphere from before was nowhere to be found. Chapter 1371. No need. Gohan wanted to reject Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's invitation, but Extinguish Immortal Sword beat him to it. Alright. It's settled then. We haven't seen each other for so many years. Let's see what kind of good territory you've prepared for yourself. Thus, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva brought the remaining 6 arhats, while Gohan brought Lu Shihua and Lu Yin. They stepped into the void together and headed towards the Bukong temple. What are you doing? While Extinguish Immortal Sword was speaking, Gohan didn't interrupt it. When the two of them entered the void again, Gohan asked Extinguish Immortal Sword in a low voice. You've forgotten about our little sister, the Immortal Slaughtering Sword. She needs enough chaotic energy to recover. Right now, the only people in this world who can use chaotic energy are the Jade Emperor and Vairocana. Now, I can get information about Vairocana from Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, Extinguish Immortal Sword explained. And Gohan nodded, agreeing with Extinguish Immortal Sword's explanation. 10 minutes later, they left the void again and found themselves in front of the magnificent Bukong temple. Even Extinguish Immortal Sword couldn't help but praise it. Ksitigarbha, your Bukong temple is only a little smaller than the Mahavira Hall of Spiritual Mountain. It seems like you really plan to become a Buddha. Not at all. I wouldn't dare to have such thoughts. The master of Buddhism is still Vairocana. I'm just building a place for him to stay. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva said with a serious face, as if he really planned to do so. This hypocritical guy. After he said nonsense like hell is not empty and he won't become a Buddha, I knew he was the most hypocritical monk in the world, Extinguish Immortal Sword said with a cold smile. Extinguish immortal sword lady, why do you say that Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva is hypocritical? I think this is a very grand wish. If one doesn't have great willpower and wisdom, why would he give up the temptation of becoming a Buddha and purify the spirits in hell? Lu Shihua asked, puzzled. You idiot, although Buddha is the highest position in Buddhism, it doesn't belong to those who are capable. Not even the strongest monk can become a Buddha. There are 108 Buddhas in Buddhism. Other than the top 10, the rest are not even comparable to Guanyin, Samantabhadra, Manjushri, and Ksitigarbha, although Bodhisattva Buddhahood is a level lower than Buddha Buddhahood, Juexian explained with a cold smile. Why is this happening? Lu Shihua muttered in a low voice. Could it be that there are internal strife within the Buddhist sects, and that Buddha Tathagata is deliberately suppressing these 4 great bodhisattvas? That's not it. Vairocana can't wait for the 4 great bodhisattvas to be promoted to Buddha Buddhahood. That way, he can relax, but being a Buddha isn't that easy. It's like the investiture of the gods. Once they become Buddhas, their true spirits will be controlled by Buddha Tathagata, the ancestor of all Buddhas. None of these 4 great bodhisattvas can escape Tathagata's grasp. On the other hand, because this bodhisattva Buddhahood was personally conferred by the receiving sage, their true spirits can be controlled by the receiving sage. The receiving sage can't wait for more experts to appear under him. He's not like Vairocana, who worries about the 4 great bodhisattvas usurping his position, so he doesn't restrict the 4 great bodhisattvas at all. That's why the Buddha Buddhahood doesn't bring any benefits, and it will also make one subject to others. Unless the 4 great bodhisattvas were kicked in the head by a donkey, they wouldn't want to become Buddhas, Extinguish Immortal Sword explained. If that's the case, why do you say that Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva is a hypocritical villain? There's nothing hypocritical about him doing this. Lu Shihua was still a little puzzled. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva is the weakest among the 4 great bodhisattvas, but he's the most ambitious one. Before the other 3 bodhisattvas joined Buddhism, they were all Vairocana's senior and junior brothers, and they were of equal status. Even after joining Buddhism, the other 3 bodhisattvas relied on the support of the primeval Lord of Heaven, so they could face Vairocana head-on. They said they wouldn't become Buddhas, and Vairocana couldn't do anything to them. Only Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva was born in the far west. He didn't have any backing, so he didn't dare to openly defy Vairocana's will. However, his ambition was the greatest. He actually learned from the 6 sages and made a great vow not to become Buddhas until hell is empty. The 6 paths of reincarnation were originally firmly controlled by the 10 Yama kings, but after Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva made such a great vow, the 2 sages Zhuanti and Jain took the opportunity to force Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva into the ground, so that they could control the vital power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. With the support of the 2 sages Zhuanti and Jain, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva naturally had the capital to fight against Vairocana, and Vairocana didn't dare to force Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva to become Buddhas. At the end of the day, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva made a great vow not to become Buddhas until hell is empty, not to release souls from purgatory, but to preserve a chance for himself to go further. In fact, he was always coveting the position of Vairocana, and even the positions of the 2 sages Zhuanti and Jain. If this great vow really succeeded, he might really be able to become a sage. That's why I said that Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva is one of the most hypocritical monks in the world, full of his own schemes. He has never really considered the souls of the dead in hell, but he still accepted the offerings of human beings for thousands of years. He's simply shameless. Extinguish Immortal Sword scolded. But isn't this a great vow that's impossible to achieve? As long as there are human deaths, souls will enter the underworld. Then, the underworld will never be empty, and Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's great vow will never be realized, Lu Shihua said. No, there's a way. Guhan, who had been listening by the side, suddenly interrupted. As long as all the living things on earth are completely destroyed, and all the ghosts in hell are destroyed, wouldn't hell be empty? Hearing Gohan's words, Lu Shihua couldn't help but shiver. This Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva was really too scary. I didn't know it was Lady Immortal Vanquishing Sword, Lady Immortal Extinguishing Sword, and Lady Immortal Entrapping Sword. This humble monk didn't welcome you from afar, and was impolite. I hope the three of you can forgive me. This humble monk is in a peaceful Buddhist land, and there's no such thing as alcohol. I'll use this cup of tea to apologize to you. As soon as Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva finished speaking, over 10 cups of tea tore through the void and appeared in front of everyone present. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva raised the teacup in his hand in a rather worldly manner and nodded at the others. Ksitigarbha, the three of us didn't come here to drink a cup of tea from you. There's no need to say anything about apologizing. It was my master's disciple who killed your people. If you want to apologize, I'm afraid the three of us should be the ones doing it. As soon as Extinguish Immortal Sword finished speaking, Immortal Vanquishing Sword and Immortal Entrapping Sword raised their teacups at the same time, apologizing to Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. We wouldn't dare, we wouldn't dare. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva hurriedly waved his hand, but his expression quickly changed. His eyes revealed great curiosity as he looked at Gohan and asked, "Please forgive this humble monk for asking too much, but the few of you just addressed this sword-bearer as master. Could it be that this benefactor is your sword-bearer?" "That's right." Immortal Vanquishing Sword nodded. "He is our sword-bearer." "I see. This humble monk has been disrespectful. This benefactor has an imposing appearance and an extraordinary bearing. At such a young age, he has become an immortal sword-bearer. In the future, he can look forward to becoming an emperor sword-bearer. It seems that benefactor will definitely become a leader of humanity in the future, an existence comparable to Kanzu and heaven covering Jiendi. Let this humble monk offer a toast to this benefactor." This Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva had become more and more worldly. No wonder Immortal Extinguishing Sword said that he was the most hypocritical monk. "You're wrong about him. He's not someone Kanzu, who failed at the last moment, can compare to," Immortal Extinguishing Sword said calmly after hearing Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's words. "What do you mean?" "Don't tell me. Your Majesties, you haven't given up." Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva was shocked and said in a panic. "We have never given up," Immortal Vanquishing Sword said calmly. "It seems that your Majesties have placed their hopes on this benefactor." Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva looked deeply at Gohan. In the end, he could not help but shake his head and said, "Your Majesties, do you really think that this benefactor can be compared to Lord Kanzu? You don't believe me, do you?" Immortal Extinguishing Sword's lips suddenly revealed a smile. "If you don't believe me, you can ask him. What is his current title?" "This." Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva looked at Gohan suspiciously. Gohan smiled and replied calmly, "I am Sword Immortal Hong Jun, Clang." The teacup in Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's hand fell to the ground. The 6 arhats behind Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva were all stunned. They had never seen Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva lose his composure like this. This Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva was not bad. He answered all the Majesty's questions without holding anything back. It seems that there is hope for Master to repair the immortal slaughtering sword. After leaving the Bukong Temple, Lu Shihua immediately congratulated Gohan. After Gohan revealed his title, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva was stunned for a full 10 seconds before he shouted Amitabha Buddha and returned to normal. Then, Immortal Vanquishing Sword told Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva about the immortal slaughtering sword, hoping that Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva could give them some pointers and tell them where Vairocana was and if he still had the ability to condense the power of chaos to repair the immortal slaughtering sword. Chapter 1372. When Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva learned that the 4 immortal slaying swords intended to continue fighting against Tong Tian and reshape the entire world, he immediately became extremely excited. He repeatedly expressed his willingness to stand on the side of the 4 immortal slaying swords and Gu Han. He would do his best to help Gu Han strengthen himself, and at the same time, help the immortal slaying sword lady return. Thus, Ksitigarbha told the 4 swords that Vairocana had indeed been seriously injured after the battle in the Alps and had been hiding in Mount Numinous to recuperate. However, Vairocana knew that he had made many enemies in the past. Many of the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas in Mount Numinous had died in battle. If the enemies of the past, such as the Heavenly Court, attacked Mount Numinous, it would be impossible for Vairocana to resist. Therefore, Mahavairocana immediately hid the spiritual mountain in the dimensional space, making it constantly float in the dimensional space. Its position could change at any time, so even if the Heavenly Court wanted to seek revenge, they wouldn't be able to find the location of the spiritual mountain. Of course, there was a huge drawback. Mount Numinous and the Buddhist sect had completely lost their influence on this world. Ksitigarbha, who had escaped, had to take the opportunity to gather the Buddhist power that had come to this world after Mount Numinous disappeared, becoming the only remaining force of the Buddhist sect in this world. Therefore, the key to repairing the immortal slaughtering sword was to find Mount Numinous hidden in the dimensional space. As long as he could find Mount Numinous, he would be able to find Vairocana. At the same time, Ksitigarbha guaranteed to Guhan that Vairocana did not want this world to end. Therefore, as long as he explained his intentions clearly, Vairocana would definitely help him repair immortal slaughtering sword. In the end, Ksitigarbha told Guhan the rules and methods to find Mount Numinous in the dimensional space. He said that as long as Guhan followed his methods, he would definitely be able to find Mount Numinous. Therefore, Lu Shihua congratulated Guhan in the end, believing that Guhan would definitely be able to repair immortal slaughtering sword. Shihua, you're still too naive. Do you really think Ksitigarbha is that kind? Hearing Lu Shihua's congratulations, Guhan's face revealed a trace of a sneer. This Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's great ambition is to not become a Buddha until hell is empty. And the best way to realize this great ambition is to destroy the whole world. He was born to stand on Tongtian's side. How could he decide to help us so easily? I'm afraid he wants to kill us. What a hypocrite! It seems like he's not telling the truth. You can't believe a single word. Lu Shihua naturally believed in his master's words, so he immediately gritted his teeth and criticized. You're wrong on this point again. A complete lie won't deceive anyone. Only a lie that's half true and half false can deceive people. Therefore, I believe that this Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva must have told us half the truth and the other half lies. Guhan smiled. Lu Shihua, what do you think the earthquake Bodhisattva said is true? Which words are false? Lu Shihua lowered his head and thought for a while. His eyes lit up as he said, It's true that Spirited Mountain is now hidden in the dimensional space, but the method he told us to find Spirited Mountain is false. If we really find Spirited Mountain, according to his method, I'm afraid we'll be lost in the dimensional space like Kanzu back then. You've finally made some progress. Guhan nodded with a smile and touched Lu Shihua's head. But you still said something wrong. It's not that we'll be lost in the dimensional space, but that I, your master, will be lost in the dimensional space. Master, what do you mean? Aren't you going to take your disciple to find Spirited Mountain? Lu Shihua said with some inexplicable panic. Of course I can't take you there. I'm teaching you like this so that when I leave this world, you can protect Yuzhang City and the things I've left behind in this world. By the way, I left you a gift of the highest position in this world. Guhan touched Lu Shihua's head and said, What? Master, are you really going to leave this world and find Spirited Mountain hidden in the dimensional space? Lu Shihua did not care about the highest position in the world at all. She only cared about her master's next move and where her master was going. No. My goal is not Spirited Mountain. I'm still millions of quarks away from becoming an Emperor sword wielder. Repairing the celestial culling sword now doesn't mean much to me, and there's no need to find Spirited Mountain now, Gohan said with a smile. Then, where are you going, Master? Lu Shihua asked in confusion. Master, I'm going to save someone. I've been waiting for this for 4 years. Now that I've finally become an immortal sword wielder, it's time to take action. Then, are you leaving now, Master? Lu Shihua's eyes suddenly welled up with tears. She threw herself into Gohan's arms and said, Master, don't go, please. Don't worry, I won't leave for the time being. You don't have 1,000,000 quarks of sword essence yet, so your cultivation isn't over yet. On this day, at the entrance of the Yanjing City Construction Committee headquarters building, the entire building could be said to be decorated with red flags and fluttering flags. Rows of beautiful women in slender cheongsams stood on both sides of the road. Countless sword wielders, which were rarely seen on normal days, appeared in groups at the Sword Committee headquarters. There were also countless cameras aimed at the entrance of the Sword Committee headquarters. The reason why the Sword Committee headquarters was so lively today was that it was an extremely important day. Today was the day when the chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters would be re-elected, which happened once every 5 years. It was said that the previous chairman, Sword Immortal Hao Tian, had entered a state of dying and might become an immortal at any time. Naturally, he could no longer hold the position of chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters. In that case, the Sword Committee headquarters was bound to change to a new chairman. However, all the netizens had a fairly unified answer for the result of this new chairman. The chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters had to be Long Shijiendi. The important position of the chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters had always been held by Emperor sword wielders since ancient times. Now that Hao Tianjiendi was about to become an immortal, there was only one Emperor sword wielder left, Long Shijiendi. Therefore, there would be no accident in the result of this election. It must be Long Shijiendi. Although everyone felt that there was no suspense in this result, it still could not stop people's curiosity about the election meeting of the Sword Committee headquarters. Almost all the sword wielders in Yanjing City, who were not qualified to attend the meeting, were waiting at the entrance of the Sword Committee headquarters. The vast number of ordinary people were not qualified to come here. They could only wait for the final result to be published through the television broadcast. According to the past practice, the result would be released to the public at around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. However, what was strange was that there was no result until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This made the waiting people feel anxious, but they also had a faint guess. Could it be that there would be any accident or change in the result of today's election? This meeting lasted until 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Just when all the audience was waiting impatiently, the figures of a large group of people finally gradually appeared at the entrance of the Sword Committee headquarters and appeared in front of the camera. These sword-bearers were all sword-bearers of the Immortal Sword tier. They were the strongest fighting force of mankind. Apart from a few sword-bearers of the Immortal Sword tier who had to stay in the base city due to the unusual situation near the base city, almost all sword-bearers of the Immortal Sword tier were present in this group of people. Some careful audience members counted and found that the total number of Immortal Sword wielders present had reached 31. It seemed that in the past 4 years, mankind had added a lot of Immortal Sword wielders. Strange? Why isn't Long Shijiendi in the team? When all the sword wielders appeared on the high platform where the result was published, some sharp-eyed audience members were immediately surprised to find that Long Shijiendi did not appear in the team of sword wielders. It should be known that in all the election meetings of the Sword Committee headquarters held in human history, Emperor sword wielders had never been absent. At least one Emperor sword wielder would appear in front of the camera. At the same time, This Emperor Sword Wielder would most likely be the successor of the next chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters. But today, this 1,000-year tradition was broken. Unexpectedly, no Emperor Sword Wielder appeared in front of the camera. Could it be that there was really a change in the facts? His Majesty Longsher Jiandi didn't come to Yanjing City this time, right? That's why he didn't appear in the meeting? Some audience members guessed. Impossible. The friend next to him immediately retorted. Don't forget that yesterday, Longsher Jiandi recorded the meeting in front of everyone in Yanjing City. All the TV stations also specially broadcast this scene live. How could Longsher Jiandi not participate in the meeting? I think there must have been some change in this meeting, so Longsher Jiandi is not willing to appear in front of the camera. What change in the world? It actually made Longsher Jiandi violate the tradition of more than 1,000 years. This audience member was even more surprised. Who knows? For all we know, there might be another Emperor Sword Wielder. Another person shrugged and said, "Hello, fellow human beings. Today, I am honored to announce to everyone that the Supreme Leader of Humanity, the 199th Chairman of the Sword Committee Headquarters, has finally been elected successfully today. In the coming years, all of us humans will unite by the side of the Chairman. With the Chairman as the core, we will create a better and safer future for humanity." The great Sun Sword Immortal held the script in his hand. Without a microphone, just his strong voice was enough for everyone present and the camera to hear clearly what he was saying. However, those with sharp eyes must have noticed that at this time, there were actually a few drops of sweat on the forehead of the great Sun Sword Immortal. At the end of the nonsense on the script, when he was finally about to announce the new chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters, suddenly there was a burst of exclamation from the entire venue. Behind the great Sun Sword Immortal, a void door opened and Longsher Jiandi, with a solemn face, passed through the void door and came to the ceremonial platform. Longsher Jiandi finally appeared. It seems that there is no change in the result this time. The new chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters is still His Majesty Longsher Jiandi. Seeing this scene, all the audience members breathed a long sigh of relief, as if the result had been decided. Chapter 1373. The representatives from the 3 base cities, who were in charge of being bystanders, also spoke. Among them, Buenos Aires had a total of 3 immortal sword bearers. One of them was in charge of the base city, and only 2 of them were present. Lenglen had 4 immortal sword bearers, and one of them was also in charge of the base city. Finally, Moscow had the most immortal sword bearers among the 5 base cities, with a total of 5. Of course, there was also one person in charge of the base city. On the stage, the great Sun Sword Immortal read the script in his hands with trepidation. He could not help but recall all the scenes that had happened in the meeting that day. Holy sh*t. A immortal sword bearer, the chairman of the Sword Committee? Did I hear wrongly? This can't be real. An audience member rubbed his ears in disbelief. Our Buenos Aires city also has no candidate to recommend. There should be 35 people in this meeting. 4 are absent, so there are 31 people. The 4 who are absent can express their opinions online and exercise their voting right. This meets the minimum requirement of 90% of the participants. I hereby announce that the voting for the 199th chairman of the Sword Committee shall now begin. Who hasn't announced yet? Sword Immortal Dwoluan shook his head in confusion. In the end, his gaze landed on Sword Immortal Ling Su, who was sitting alone in a corner. Only then did he come to a sudden realization. So Yuzhong City hasn't made a decision yet. But that's all right, I can speak on behalf of Yuzhong City. Yuzhong City has no candidate to recommend. Whoosh! Both the people waiting at the venue and the people watching the live broadcast in front of their televisions were stunned. After hearing this news, everyone fell into a state of shock. After a few seconds of deathly silence, everyone was in an uproar. No one could have expected that the final winner would be Lu Shihua. However, it was only for a brief moment. They did not take this slight tremble to heart. Our Balan city also has no candidate to recommend, the immortal sword bearer from Balan city said. Balan city originally had 3 immortal sword bearers. However, one of them had to stay in Balan city, so only 2 were present. More importantly, as long as she doesn't die in the future, she might be able to ascend to the throne before she's 30 years old. It shouldn't be a big problem for her to live to 82 years old. In that case, she would have 50 years of Emperor Sword's peak, which would be able to do a lot of things for humanity. Even if Longshu Jiendi is standing in front of them now, Longshu Jiendi can only live for more than 20 years at most. The next 40 years will all belong to her. Of course, it is a very normal thing to please her now. Alright. Since Yan Jing doesn't have a candidate to recommend, the current situation is very clear. Only His Majesty Longshu Jiendi is participating in the election. We don't even need to vote. We can directly announce the new chairman of the Sword Committee. The great Sun Sword Immortal took a deep breath and forced himself to announce the result in front of everyone. I hereby announce that the 199th chairman of the Sword Committee is an immortal sword-level sword wielder from Yuzhong City Sword Pavilion Master, Shihua Sword Immortal, Miss Lu Shihua. The same goes for Moscow, who said that Yuzhong City doesn't have a candidate to recommend. Sword Immortal Overlook Void gritted his teeth and abruptly stood up from his chair. He then took out a candidate book from his dimensional pocket and said, Yuzhong City recommends Shihua Sword Spirit as a candidate to run for the 199th chairman of the Sword Committee. Strange? Why do I feel that Miss Ling's tone is a little strange? It feels like there's a hidden meaning in her words. She wants to see us make a fool of ourselves. Although Liuyan Ling's answer was very normal, in the ears of some old people, there was something unusual in Liuyan Ling's words. **T history. It's not like there hasn't been a chairman of the Sword Committee at the immortal sword level in the past. Don't forget those guys from the Lun Yen family. I really don't know how you passed the history exam. You don't even know about such a compulsory test, a friend said disdainfully. Sword Immortal Shihua is a sword wielder at the immortal sword level from Yuzhong City. He inherited the will of the great heaven shrouding Jiendi and became the new leader of humanity. At the same time, Sword Immortal Shihua is also the youngest sword wielder in human history. At the age of 22, he stood at the position of a sword wielder at the immortal sword level. This is a miracle that has never happened since ancient times. You should know that just a year ago, this record was maintained at the age of 29. Sword Immortal Shihua forcibly raised this record by a full 7 years. His ability is obvious. If not me, who else can do it? The sword wielder in London, who had just become a sword wielder at the immortal sword level, immediately jumped out and said matter-of-factly, I don't think these committee members are crazy. On the contrary, they made the most correct decision. Being 22 years old is not a burden to Sword Immortal Shihua. On the contrary, it is her biggest advantage. A sword wielder at the immortal sword level at the age of 22 has also broken the record that has existed for 1,000 years. Even back then, Kanzu only ascended to the throne at the age of 29. She is indeed the first person to do this. **T, I was almost scared to death. Speaking of which, does this count as us witnessing history? This is the first human supreme leader at the immortal sword level in history. This audience member clutched his chest as if his heart had jumped out of his chest because of this news. Sorry, you really didn't hear wrong. This Sword Immortal Shihua will be the supreme leader of our human race for the next 5 years. How about it? Are you surprised? Aren't you surprised? His friend replied. This question stopped his friend. After hesitating for a while, he said with slight hesitation, Did we forget someone? We forgot that behind Sword Immortal Shihua, there is an even more terrifying master, Sword Immortal Hong Jun, who has not been heard of for a long time. We have no candidates to recommend, just like London. This representative of London was our old acquaintance, Miss Lu Anna. However, in this year, there had been a lot of changes in London. For example, there was another young sword wielder at the immortal sword level in London, and the total number of sword wielder at the immortal sword level had reached 3. In order to support Long Shurjiendi, these 3 sword wielder at the Emperor's sword level attended this meeting. We have no candidates to recommend in Yenjing. At this time, since the Great Sun Sword Immortal had become the host of the meeting, he naturally could no longer be the representative of Yenjing. Fortunately, Yenjing had the most sword wielder at the immortal sword level, so immediately a valiant and heroic woman with a smile on her face stood up and said, "But that is also 20 years later. Now Long Shurjiendi is still the strongest in the world. How can he let this sword immortal Shi Hua take the position that was originally destined to belong to him? Even if Long Shurjiendi is broad-minded, this is no longer a simple matter of broad-mindedness. This is related to the face of Jiendi. Today's action is more vicious than a slap in Long Shurjiendi's face." The meeting began at 10 o'clock in the morning. Long Shurjiendi also appeared in the meeting room as expected. At that time, except for the sword-bearers of Yenjing and Yuzhang City, the sword-bearers of the other base cities looked as usual. There was no surprise or excitement. Obviously, in their eyes, there was no longer any suspense about the position of the supreme leader of humanity. We, London, recommend Long Shurjiendi as a candidate to run for the 199th chairman of the Sword Committee. After the 5 base cities had finished speaking, the representative of London finally stood up and handed his city's election letter to the Great Sun Sword Immortal. "Hey, Sword Immortal Doran, don't be so hasty. There is still a base city that has not announced its decision." The Great Sun Sword Immortal shook his head and said, "At the same time, Sword Immortal Shihua has the angel bloodline and can synchronize the angel series sword ladies without any hindrance. At 10:32 this morning, he successfully synchronized with the sword lady 10-winged angel sword. As long as he reaches 10 million quarks of sword elements, he is destined to be able to synchronize with the sword lady 12-winged angel sword. He is destined to be an Emperor's sword bearer and is worthy of being one of the strongest people in the future of humanity. He is also the hope of humanity's future. By the way, Yenjing City had also given birth to a new sword lady, so there were a total of 12 sword lady sword in Yenjing City. First, let's elect a candidate. Each base city has a candidate for the chairman of the Sword Committee. Representatives of the base cities, please submit your candidate's election letter in writing. After the representative of London handed over the election letter, all the other base cities turned their attention to the representative of Yenjing City. At this time, the only person who was qualified to compete with Long Shurjiendi for the chairman of the Sword Committee was Yenjing City's Emperor sword bearer, Hao Tianjiendi. However, everyone felt that Hao Tianjiendi was too stupid to compete with Long Shurjiendi. He had been the chairman of the Sword Committee for 15 years, and it was time to give this position to a younger person. The Great Sun Sword Immortal loudly explained to everyone why he had chosen Lu Shihua. At the same time, the audience also began to discuss. "Hey, people from the Lunyan family, how can they be the same?" This audience member did not care about his friend's analogy. He continued to ask excitedly and curiously, "Do you think that the heads of these sword committee members are filled with sh*t? Why would they choose a sword immortal sword wielder, and a mere 22-year-old sword immortal sword wielder at that? What are they going to do to the Dragon Lion Sword Emperor? I'm afraid Long Shurjiendi is going crazy. I'm afraid he will be the first Emperor sword bearer in history." "Hello, Miss Ling." Everyone nodded to this female sword bearer. This young lady of the Lun Yen family had become a sword lady sword bearer at the age of 23, breaking the unprecedented record for a sword lady sword bearer. This age had already surpassed the ancestors of the Lun Yen family, including Kenzu. This young lady had a high chance of becoming the fourth emperor sword bearer in the Lun Yen family since ancient times. Perhaps in another decade, Miss Ling could also stand here and compete with Long Shijiendi for the position of chairman of the Sword Committee. However, she could not do so now, so she could only wisely represent Yanjing City and give up this competition. The host of this meeting was still the great Sun Sword Immortal, but when he spoke, his voice was obviously trembling. This was heard by the people from other Bay cities, and they were a little curious. "We, Los Angeles, have no candidates to recommend," a white-haired old man said first, and then the other two people beside him nodded involuntarily. There were a total of 3 sword lady sword bearers in Los Angeles, and all of them were present today. Chapter 1374. Silence. The entire conference room was silent. Apart from the immortal sword wielders in Yanjing City, all the other immortal sword wielders in the other Bay cities stared at Sword Immortal Ling Su as if he were a monster. The entire conference room was silent for a full minute before Sword Immortal Doran couldn't help but say, "Sword Immortal Ling Su, did I hear you right? You said Shihua Sword Spirit, not Shihua Sword Immortal, and definitely not Shihua Jiendi. It's the West Flower Sword Spirit." Sword Immortal Ling Su braced himself and said, "Sword Immortal Ling Su. No, Senior Ling Su. I think you're getting on in years, your reaction isn't very good. I think you should hurry up and take back this letter of election." Sword Immortal Dwuluan pressed a hand against the letter of election in Sword Immortal Ling Su's hand. What? Could it be that the rules of the Sword Committee headquarters clearly state that a spirit sword holder is not qualified to be a candidate for the chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters? No. Sword Immortal Dwuluan still wanted to speak, but the Great Sun Sword Immortal immediately replied. Meanwhile, Sword Immortal Ling Su heaved a long sigh of relief and handed the candidate list to the Great Sun Sword Immortal. "Your Majesty!" Sword Immortal Dwuluan couldn't help but turn his gaze towards Long Shijiendi. Long Shijiendi, who had never thought that such a scene would occur, couldn't help but show a somewhat cautious expression. He knew that Lu Shihua was Gohan's disciple, and he also knew how Gohan had pushed Lu Shihua to the position of Yuzhang's Sword Pavilion Master. Long Shi and Jiendi were completely unable to see through this Gohan. Only God knew whether this Gohan would arrange any obstacles for him or not. Thinking of this, even Long Shijiendi, who felt that he was absolutely safe, had no choice but to reveal a cautious expression. Cough cough. Doran, step down. Long Shijiendi first asked Sword Immortal Doran to step down, and then lightly said to everyone, "This Emperor naturally knows the rules of the Sword Committee, but the Sword Committee also has such a rule, that the candidates must personally attend the election meeting. It's just that I don't see the Sword Spirit of Shihua in this venue. If the Sword Spirit of Shihua can't appear, I'm afraid he'll be disqualified." "That's right. There is indeed such a rule. Yes. Since she wants to participate in the election of the Sword Committee, it is necessary to maintain respect for the Sword Committee. If she wants to participate in the election without coming here, of course, it is impossible." The other Sword Immortal level sword bearers of other base cities nodded repeatedly, echoing Long Shijiendi's statement. "We're here. The Shihua Sword Spirit has already arrived in Yanjing City, and I guarantee that he will be in the conference room before 11 o'clock. Sword Immortal Ling Su immediately stood up. "All right. I will have the security personnel guarding the conference room pay attention. When the Sword Spirit of Shihua arrives, they will immediately open up a green passageway and let the Sword Spirit of Shihua enter quickly." "Oh, that's fine." Long Shijiendi nodded, then used his mind to send a message to Doran's Sword Immortal through his personal terminal. Doran's Sword Immortal immediately stood up and retorted, "I'm afraid that won't work either." "Sword Immortal Doran, what else do you have to say?" Great Sun Sword Immortal said with some displeasure. "It's very simple. According to the rules of the Sword Committee, only Sword Immortal level and above sword bearers are qualified to participate in today's election meeting. Therefore, all the people gathered here today are genuine Sword Immortal level sword bearers, and not a single Spirit Sword level is in this conference room. So, according to the rules, the Sword Spirit of Shihua is naturally not qualified to enter. Therefore, I hope that Senior Great Sun Sword Immortal can abide by the rules of the Sword Committee, and not let in any unruly sword bearers, instead of opening up some green passageway." Sword Immortal Doran said proudly. "Yes, that's right, there is indeed such a rule. Yes, we can't let the Sword Spirit of Shihua enter the conference room. Otherwise, wouldn't the other Spirit Sword level sword bearers also be qualified to enter? His Majesty Longshur Jiendi is really amazing." With just a few words, he blocked all the paths of the Sword Spirit of Shihua. "I don't think it matters. A Spirit Sword level sword bearer coming here is just asking to be humiliated. Who would really vote for her? Oh, I reckon that Sword Immortal Ling Su's vote will be for her." The Sword Immortal level sword bearers from other base cities discussed animatedly. At the same time, they praised the power of Longshur Jiendi's two combination punches. On one hand, he required the candidates to stay in the conference room, and on the other hand, he didn't let the Spirit Sword level sword bearers have a chance to appear in the conference room. Perfectly and reasonably using the rules, he firmly blocked the opponent outside the door. It was just that many Sword Immortal level sword bearers were a little curious. Did Longshur Jiendi have to do this? Did he really think that a Spirit Sword level sword bearer could threaten his position? Great Sun Sword Immortal, since all the letters of election have been delivered, and the candidates have been confirmed, can you announce the start of the voting? In just a few seconds, Longshur Jiendi directly opened his mouth and urged. A dozen beads of sweat instantly appeared on Great Sun Sword Immortal's forehead. He looked at Sword Immortal Ling Su with a very difficult expression, giving him an extremely complicated look that contained thousands of words. Sword Immortal Ling Su shook his head slightly at Great Sun Sword Immortal, indicating that he should continue to delay. "Great Sun Sword Immortal, what are you still looking at? Hurry up and announce the start of the voting. If you, Great Sun Sword Immortal, feel that you are not feeling well, then I can help you to preside over this voting." Longshur Jiendi urged again, and even wanted to snatch the Great Sun Sword Immortal's hosting circle, not giving Great Sun Sword Immortal any chance to delay. His Majesty Longshur is right. Great Sun Sword Immortal, you can indeed announce the start of the voting. Just as Great Sun Sword Immortal was in a dilemma, the door of the conference room was suddenly pushed open, and a somewhat vigorous and heroic figure strode into the conference room. Lu Shihua. It's Sword Spirit Lu Shihua. She actually came. Seeing this young girl who suddenly appeared, many immortal sword rank sword bearers immediately recognized her. Originally, the immortal sword rank sword bearers were not interested in learning more about a spiritual sword rank sword bearer. However, because Lu Shihua was the insane disciple of Guhan, all the immortal sword rank sword bearers could not help but pay attention to Lu Shihua. They had also seen many pictures of Lu Shihua. However, compared to the Lu Shihua in the photos, the current Lu Shihua's skin was a little darker, and her temperament was more valiant. Her eyes were filled with confidence that Lu Shihua had never shown before. This especially left a deep impression on Great Sun Sword Immortal. Compared to the timid little girl from a year ago, Lu Shihua seemed to be a completely different person. One could faintly see the shadow of Gohan in her. "How dare you? Who let you in? Get out immediately. This is not a place where a spirit sword rank sword bearer can enter." Sword Immortal Doran was the first to react, and immediately tugged on Lu Shihua's sleeve, driving her out with a displeased expression. "Please be a little more respectful." Lu Shihua's arm shook slightly, and Sword Immortal Doran's arm was involuntarily pushed to the side by Lu Shihua. "My hand." Sword Immortal Doran looked at his own palm in disbelief. He had not felt anything just now, and his palm had already left Lu Shihua's arm. Unexpectedly, Great Sun Sword Immortal Doran suddenly took the initiative to say to Lu Shihua, "Sword Spirit Lu Shihua, this is indeed not a place where a spirit sword rank sword bearer like you should be. Senior Great Sun Sword Immortal, please rest assured. I, Lu Shihua, understand these rules. How about this?" As Lu Shihua's voice fell, a void gate instantly tore open in front of her. It quietly floated beside Lu Shihua, silently maintaining its own existence. A void gate. All the immortal sword rank sword bearers present exchanged a few glances, as if asking if the other party had opened a void gate. However, the shock in everyone's eyes showed that none of the other immortal sword rank sword bearers present had opened a void gate. This void gate had been opened by Lu Shihua's own power. Putting away the void gate, Lu Shihua said calmly, "This can prove my identity, and whether I have the right to stay in this conference room." "That's right. This is enough. Shihua, you indeed have the right to stay in this conference room." Great Sun Sword Immortal suddenly smiled, and at the same time, said to all the sword bearers present, "Just now, news came from the Sword Tower. Just a minute ago, Miss Lu Shihua successfully completed synchronization with the immortal sword rank sword mistress, the 10-winged angel sword lady, stored in our Yanjing city. Miss Lu Shihua has also officially become an immortal sword rank sword bearer. Congratulations, Sword Immortal Shihua." Great Sun Sword Immortal was the first to applaud. "Congratulations, Shihua." Sword Immortal Ling Su finally let out a long sigh of relief, and then also applauded and congratulated. In the face of a new immortal sword rank sword bearer, it was basic etiquette to applaud and congratulate, so in the end, even Longshu Jiandi had to applaud and congratulate Sword Immortal Shihua. At the same time, this also meant that Sword Immortal Shihua indeed had the right to stay in this conference room, and also had the right to become a candidate. Longshu Jiandi also had to face this competitor who had suddenly appeared in front of him. Next, let's invite the two candidates to give their own campaign speeches. Great Sun Sword Immortal continued, and Lu Shihua and Longshu Jiandi also gave their own campaign speeches one after another. The Dragon Lion Sword Emperor's speech was very stable. Just like all the previous chairmen who had succeeded in the election, it covered all aspects and was basically flawless. But also because of the watertight reason, there were almost no highlights in this speech, making people who listened to it feel drowsy. This was obviously something that could only be written by a veteran author who had been writing for many years. But Lu Shihua's speech was different. Although a lot of important things were missing, and even some sentences were not smooth, the whole speech was full of all kinds of problems, and the literary talent was almost non-existent. But Lu Shihua focused on how he planned to create a new future for mankind, and even revealed his plan to build a new 9th base city. The whole speech was full of enthusiasm, full of the youthful spirit that young people should have. Obviously, this speech was written by Lu Shihua himself. Chapter 1375. If the voting results were to be decided by the speech alone, then I would definitely vote for Miss Lu Shihua. Unfortunately, that's not the case. After listening to the speeches of the two speakers, an immortal sword-level swordsman said with a serious expression. This sentence seemed to explain the results of this voting. Let's begin the voting. According to the rules, the base city with the least voting rights will be the first to vote. The Great Sun Sword Immortal said. Because the candidates don't have voting rights, Yuzhang City only has 2 votes. The immortal sword-level swordsman of Yuzhang City will be the first to announce his choice. Alright, Sword Immortal Ling Su, the immortal sword-level swordsman of Yuzhang City, votes for Sword Immortal Xihua. Sword Immortal Ling Su stood up and said without hesitation. The other swordsmen present didn't find this result strange. Readers might find it strange. Shouldn't the voting be a secret vote? That is to hide the identities of all the voters to avoid retaliation after the voting results were out? To answer this question, readers can refer to the voting process of the United Nations before the Great Apocalypse. The voting results of all countries were all announced transparently, and only then would the world know that the Chinese always abstained. Sword Immortal Hongjun, the immortal sword-level swordsman of Yuzhang City, votes for Sword Immortal Xihua. After Sword Immortal Ling Su's voice fell, Guhan's voice suddenly sounded from the broadcast in the conference room, announcing the results of his voting. The other immortal sword-level swordsmen were a little puzzled by this situation. Even a fool knew that Sword Immortal Ling Su didn't have the courage to support Lu Xihua as the chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters. In the entire Yuzhang City, only Sword Immortal Xihua's master, Sword Immortal Hongjun Guhan, had such an audacious idea. Therefore, the mastermind behind all this had to be this Sword Immortal Hongjun. At the crucial moment that would decide whether they would win or lose, this Sword Immortal Hongjun didn't control the entire situation at the conference, but instead left the conference to vote through the quantum communication network. Could it be that this Sword Immortal Hongjun was so ambitious that he felt that Xihua's victory was already in his grasp? Long Shi Jiandi, 0 votes, Sword Immortal Xihua, 2 vote. The projector on the screen immediately showed the current voting results, and Sword Immortal Xihua was leading by 2 votes. The city of Buenos Aires has 3 votes. Next, the sword bearers of Buenos Aires will begin voting, the great Sun Sword Immortal continued. I, Sword Celestial, who belongs to the Sword Immortal realm in Buenos Aires, vote for the Dragon Lion Sword Emperor. Sword-level swordsman of Sword-level swordsman of Buenos Aires City, votes for Long Shi Jiandi. Sword-level swordsman of Sword-level swordsman for Long Shi for Sword In, said. Immortal sword-level swordsman Bu for Long Shi City. Sword-level swordsman said one. Said, it for Long Shi sword-level swordsman. Buenos, of immortal sword-level swordsman, said. In this way, Long Shi Jiandi had 3 votes, successfully overtaking Lu Xihua. Next was Berlin, which had 3 votes, Jerusalem, which had 4 votes, London, which had 3 votes, and Moscow, which had 5 votes, announced that it would vote for Long Shi Jiandi. The score had reached a very wide gap of 18-2. Long Shi Jiandi had 18 votes, while Lu Xihua only had 2 votes from Yuzhang City. At this time, only Yanjing City, which had the largest number of people, had not yet voted. However, it seemed that the sword-level swordsmen of Yanjing City could not change the whole situation at all. Although Yanjing City had an unprecedented 12 sword-level swordsmen, even if all 12 of them voted for Lu Xihua, they would only have 14 votes, which could not shake Long Shi Jiandi's 18 vote. Besides, how could all the sword-level swordsmen of Yanjing City vote for Sword Immortal Xihua? Even a fool knew that the history between Yanjing City and Yuzhang City was full of filth and strife. It was impossible for the people of these 2 cities to come together. Therefore, at this time, except for all the swordsmen of Yanjing City and Yuzhang City, almost all the sword-level swordsmen of Yanjing City thought that Long Shi Jiandi had already won. Until the first sword-level swordsman of Yanjing City to vote, Sword Immortal Lu Ling, stood up and announced the result of her vote. I, Sword Immortal Lu Ling, the Sword Immortal of Yanjing City, cast my vote for Sword Immortal Xihua. Liuyan Ling announced loudly, without any hesitation, that she had cast her vote for Lu Xihua. Hearing this result, although the other people present were a little surprised, they still felt that it was within their understanding. Now the whole human world had already spread that Liuyan Ling, the heir of the Liuyan family, had an ambiguous relationship with Sword Immortal Shihua's master, Sword Immortal Hong Jun. Sword Immortal Hong Jun was very likely to become the son-in-law of the Liunian family in the future. In this way, Sword Immortal Lu Ling was Sword Immortal Shihua's master's wife, so it was not strange that Liunian Ling would cast her vote for her man's disciple. I, Sword Immortal Great Sun, the Sword Immortal of Yanjing City, cast my vote for Sword Immortal Shihua. The next to vote was Sword Immortal Great Sunday. The crowd's disagreement with the Sword Immortal Great Sun's choice was even greater than that of Liunian Ling. However, they could still find an explanation. It was said that Sword Immortal Great Sun owed Sword Immortal Hong Jun a huge favor in order to retrieve the natural sword lady that had been lost in Yanjing City. Therefore, it seemed reasonable that he would use a vote to repay this favor. I, Sword Immortal Wu Zhang, the Sword Immortal of Yanjing City, cast my vote for Sword Immortal Shihua. The next to vote was Wu Zhang Shifang. This vote caused everyone's jaws to drop. This time, they seemed to be unable to find a normal reason to explain Wu Zhang Shifang's choice. I heard that Sword Immortal Hong Jun was on good terms with Sword Immortal Wu Zhang when he was still an ancient Sword Immortal. Perhaps they are old friends. Finally, some Sword Immortal of Yanjing City, who had a deep understanding of the history of Gohan's rise, made a weak guess. I, Sword Immortal XX, the Sword Immortal of Yanjing City, cast my vote for Sword Immortal Shihua. However, what happened next terrified everyone. There was no change in the 12 Sword Immortal Shihua swordbearers in Yanjing City. They all cast their votes for Sword Immortal Shihua. This was a total of 12 votes. In the blink of an eye, the score between the two became 18-14. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Now that all the Sword Immortal Shihua swordbearers have finished voting, His Majesty is still ahead by a total of 4 votes. The position of chairman is still His Majesty. Sword Immortal Dwuluan saw that the atmosphere in the conference room was a little strange, so he took the initiative to say this loudly. Sword Immortal Dwuluan felt that after he said this, the atmosphere in the conference room should ease. At the same time, he should officially announce that His Majesty was the new supreme leader of the human race. However, what surprised Sword Immortal Dwuluan was that after he said this, the atmosphere in the conference room did not ease. Instead, more than half of the Sword Immortal Shihua swordbearers looked at Sword Immortal Dwuluan mockingly, as if what Sword Immortal Dwuluan had just said was very stupid. Did I say something wrong? I said. Sword Immortal Dwuluan wanted to say more, but the Pirate Immortal Shihua, who was sitting next to him, immediately poked him in the back with Sword Chi. At the same time, he whispered in Sword Immortal Dwuluan's ear, "Shut up. There is still one person who hasn't voted." Sword Immortal Dwuluan's face instantly swelled red. After hearing the Pirate Immortal Shihua's reminder, this young Sword Immortal Shihua finally reacted. There was indeed one more person who hadn't voted. Your Majesty Hao Tian, are you there? Would you like to have a chat with me? Of course, Long Shi Jiandi knew who the most important person was. If he could not get that person's support, it was very likely that he would fall short by 1 vote. Therefore, Long Shi Jiandi immediately sent a communication invitation to that person. However, what made Long Shi Jiandi feel a little hopeless was that no matter how many times he sent the invitation, that person did not pick up his communication. In the end, he only heard a somewhat weak voice coming from the entire conference room. I, Yanjing City's Sword Immortal Shihua, Hao Tian Jiandi, cast my 5 votes for Sword Immortal Shihua. In the next second, the face of Long Shi Jiandi, who was originally high and mighty, darkened. A void door appeared in front of him, and in the next second, Long Shi Jiandi disappeared into the void door. Obviously, Long Shi Jiandi knew that he could no longer change this damn situation. Well, everyone, now that all the Sword Immortal level and above have completed their votes, the final results are as follows. His Majesty Long Shi Jiandi has 18 votes, and Sword Immortal Shihua has 19 votes. I now announce that Sword Immortal Shihua has won by 1 vote. The 199th chairman of the Sword Committee is Sword Immortal Shihua from Yuzhong City. After the Great Sun Sword Immortal announced this result, his forehead was already beaded with sweat. To the Great Sun Sword Immortal, saying this was even more painful than fighting with Yuenko and the others. He won. After hearing this result, Sword Immortal Ling Su instantly slumped weakly into the chair. On the other hand, Sword Immortal Shihua had a calm expression, as if all this was already within her expectations. Oh my God! Has the first Sword Immortal level chairman of the Sword Committee in 1,000 years finally been born? After hearing this result, the sword bearers from the other base cities did not feel any anger or joy. After all, it was not someone from their city who had become the supreme leader of the human race, so who was elected in the end had little to do with them. At this moment, all they felt was amazement. They were amazed that the first human supreme leader in 1,000 years, who was not from the Lun Yen family, had become the supreme leader of the human race. They wanted to find out what kind of mental illness had gotten into Yanjing City, and what kind of benefits had they received for them to unanimously vote for Lu Shihua. This was something that no one could understand at this moment. How can this be? This is unfair. Our Majesty Long Shijiendi has not voted yet. He has a total of 5 votes. Enough! The Pirate Sword Immortal stood up abruptly and said calmly, His Majesty Long Shi is a candidate. His Majesty does not have the right to vote for himself. Didn't you see that His Majesty has already left? This means that His Majesty has already acknowledged the results of this election. Let us go congratulate Chairman Shihua. Sword Immortal Doran's face instantly turned ashen. Chapter 1376. At the same time, the Great Sun Sword Immortal finally finished reading the speech in his hand. But just as the Great Sun Sword Immortal was worried about, after he announced the final result, all the audience fell into a deathly silence. According to the usual practice, after the announcement of the result, all the audience should applaud enthusiastically to welcome the birth of the new supreme leader of mankind. But this long silence made the whole scene fall into an extremely awkward atmosphere, which showed that the audience did not recognize the final result of the election. They did not want an immortal sword-level sword-bearer to become their supreme leader. At this time, all the audience's attention was focused on Long Shijiendi, who had just appeared. They looked eagerly at Long Shijiendi. At this time, as Long Shijiendi shouted loudly, they would immediately respond to Long Shijiendi's call to expose this hypocritical vote. Oh no! Seeing this scene, the Great Sun Sword Immortal's heart suddenly sank. Now was the time for everyone to gather. If Long Shijiendi really said something to resist, it was estimated that the whole scene would fall into a state of loss of control. God knew what the final result would be. Clap, 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 clap. To everyone's surprise, Long Shijiendi, who was the focus of attention, suddenly began to applaud. And seeing this scene, the Great Sun Sword Immortal shivered from head to toe and also applauded. The other immortal sword-level sword-bearers of Yanjing City immediately followed suit and applauded together. Seeing Long Shijiendi applauding himself, the other immortal sword-level sword-bearers of other base cities were too lazy to oppose anything, and began to applaud for the first time. And as the applause sounded on the ceremonial platform, sparse applause also began to appear under the ceremonial platform. In the end, the audience who could not get a response from Long Shijiendi could only applaud helplessly. In the end, there was finally a burst of applause on the stage and under the stage. Although there were many people applauding, there was no enthusiasm in the applause. Years later, in the 5th episode of the documentary series Shihua Jiendi, a director said, "This was probably the most mocking and helpless applause in the voting ceremony of the new chairman of the Sword Committee in the past 1,000 years." At that time, those helpless and angry people who cursed the shady politics in their hearts had no idea what a great new era this new supreme leader of mankind would usher in. With the applause of Long Shurjendi, who represented that one of the strongest human beings had truly recognized Lu Shihua's identity, the final result became indisputable. Long Shurjendi had completely given up his last chance to become the supreme leader of mankind. At this time, Long Shurjendi, who was constantly applauding, felt a sense of loss in his heart as he recalled everything that had just happened. When he heard that Haotian Jiendi had cast all his 5 votes for Lu Shihua, Long Shurjendi knew that the overall situation could not be changed. In anger, Long Shurjendi directly opened the void door, and the next second, he appeared in front of the door of a simple 2-story building. Because this small building had a formation to suppress the void, otherwise, Long Shurjendi would have rushed directly into this small building through the void. Who is it? This is His Majesty Haotian's seclusion place. No one is allowed to enter. Seeing someone suddenly appear in front of the small building, the 2 heavily armed special soldiers guarding the door immediately pointed their guns at Long Shurjendi and said, "Get out of here!" Long Shurjendi angrily waved his sleeves, and the 2 special soldiers directly flew dozens of meters away and heavily hit the ground. Blood instantly flowed on the ground, and they were seriously injured. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The 2 special soldiers used the last of their strength to press the alarm, and in an instant hundreds of special soldiers rushed out from all directions and aimed their guns at Long Shurjendi again. Just as the angry Long Shurjendi was about to send these ungrateful special soldiers flying, a weak voice suddenly came from the small building. "This is Long Shurjendi. How can you stop him? You retreat and invite His Majesty Long Shur in." Yes. Just like their sudden appearance, these special soldiers also disappeared without a trace in just a few seconds with their 2 seriously injured comrades. After a cold snort, Long Shurjendi kicked open the door of the small building and directly walked inside. The decoration of the small building was very simple. On the first floor there was only a simple living room, a simple kitchen, and a few small doors to several rooms. In addition, there were 6 exclusive maids standing neatly in the living room, seemingly welcoming the arrival of Long Shurjendi. Unlike Gohan's exclusive maids who were in their romantic years, the youngest of these 6 exclusive maids was already more than 50 years old, and the oldest had already turned gray, becoming an old woman with 1 foot in the grave. However, they still scrupulously performed their duties and maintained the most beautiful posture of exclusive maids, standing in the living room with perfect posture. Good. Long Shurjendi unconsciously nodded. He knew that these exclusive maids had accompanied Haotian Jiendi all his life. The oldest of them was probably the one who had served and accompanied Haotian Jiendi all his life when Haotian Jiendi was still a fledgling 18-year-old ancient sword-rank youngster, and finally aged into such an exclusive maid. In the face of such exclusive maids, even Long Shurjendi couldn't help but feel a bit of admiration from the bottom of his heart. Unlike Haotian Jiendi, Long Shurjendi didn't have only 6 exclusive maids. After ascending the throne, Long Shurjendi didn't hide his desire in the slightest, and he had more than 100 exclusive maids. As for those exclusive maids who had initially followed Long Shurjendi had already let them go home. After all, these exclusive maids were already old, and their loose skin and wrinkled faces could no longer meet Long Shurjendi's requirements for beauty. Long Shurjendi no longer needed these exclusive maids, so naturally, he would let them go home. It was just that these exclusive maids had dedicated their best years to Long Shurjendi. When they grew old, perhaps they wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing, but in the end, they could only live alone and die alone, without anyone to accompany them. After all, they used to be Long Shurjendi's women. Which man would dare to touch the women who used to belong to Long Shurjendi? Your Majesty Haotian, I need an explanation. You must give me a clear explanation as to why you gave those 5 votes to that Lu Shihua. If you don't give me a clear explanation, I will burn down this small building of yours. Henceforth, I will sever all ties with your Yanjing city, and will no longer listen to any orders from the Sword Committee. If your Yanjing city wants to play, then go play by yourself. The Dragon Lion Sword Emperor quickly tossed aside his lament for these exclusive maidservants, and said angrily to the Clear Sky Sword Emperor, "Don't be like this." Cough cough. In a room with a closed door, Hao Tianjiandi's increasingly weak voice sounded, "Your Majesty Longsure, this old man is already a man who is about to soar to the heavens, why are you so angry?" A man who is about to soar to the heavens. I see that you are manipulating everything behind the scenes. You are very powerful. Today, I want to see how you are going to soar to the heavens. Longsure Jiandi angrily roared, and was ready to directly rush into Hao Tianjiandi's room. "Your Majesty Longsure," Hao Tianjiandi suddenly roared, "aren't you afraid of touching this old man's immortal ascension chi? If you really want to see this old man's current appearance, then come in, but don't regret it." Longsure Jiandi immediately stopped his impulsive footsteps, and at the same time, his face alternated between blue and white. He was extremely annoyed with his impulsive behavior just now. Indeed, his mind had been blinded by anger just now, and if he had really rushed in rashly, Longsure Jiandi did not want to follow in Hao Tianjiandi's footsteps so early. "Then you must give me a reason, otherwise I will turn your Yanjing city upside down," Longsure Jiandi still said with some unwillingness. "The reason is very simple, because Sword Immortal Shihua's master, Sword Immortal Hongjun, returned our Yanjing city's innate sword lady to us, and in return, our Yanjing city promised to cast all the votes for Sword Immortal Shihua. Are you satisfied with this explanation?" Hao Tianjiandi's voice became calm. "Satisfied?" Longsure Jiandi sneered. "This may really be one of the reasons, but don't try to fool me. You can never offend me for such a reason. Have you forgotten that there is still that existence behind me? It is also that existence's intention that I succeed you as the new supreme leader of mankind. Even if you are not afraid of my revenge, are you not afraid of the revenge of that existence?" Listening to the meaning of Longsure Jiandi's words, it seemed that there was another greater existence behind Longsure Jiandi, and this existence could even order and command Longsure Jiandi. If such news was leaked to the internet, perhaps it would cause a huge storm in an instant. I am about to ascend to heaven. Even if that existence kills me, what do I have to fear? Hao Tianjiandi's voice was still calm. Moreover, even the Lunyan family did not come forward to oppose it, so what is there to be afraid of in Yanjing City? The Lunyan family. I really don't understand what they are thinking. Forget about that love-struck girl Yunyan Ling. Fleeting Wooden Fish is clearly not dead. Why didn't they stop his granddaughter's action? Longsure Jiandi said with a pained expression. It seems that you still don't know this news. After listening to Longsure Jiandi's words, Hao Tianjiandi was obviously silent for a moment, and then with a somewhat trembling voice, he said a surprising fact. The old guy Fleeting Wooden Fish is dead. Just a minute ago, he died in his room. What? Fleeting Wooden Fish is dead. Longsure Jiandi's eyes instantly widened like copper bells, simply unable to accept this fact. Don't make wild guesses. Fleeting Wooden Fish is old. He is also more than 90 years old, and it is time for him to die, just like me. Hao Tianjiandi's voice became increasingly weak. Chapter 1377. After a long silence, Longsure Jiandi asked coldly, "Did Fleeting Wooden Fish really die of old age? So what if he did? So what if he didn't? But at least this is Fleeting Wooden Fish's own choice." Hao Tianjiandi said weakly. "All right, he even wants to make a move on the Fleeting family. I really don't know what that person is after." Longsure Jiandi sighed. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he said, But this matter has nothing to do with that person. This time, it's still your problem. Why did you vote for that woman, Lu Shihua? You must give me an explanation. Why don't you understand the meaning of my words? Who said that fleeting wooden fish's death has nothing to do with Lu Shihua? Hao Tianjin sighed. Even before his death, fleeting wooden fish did not tell Fleeting Jing about that person. No one in the Fleeting family knows of that person's existence. Unless that person appears in person, he can forget about giving orders to the Fleeting family. In this way, the Fleeting family is completely out of that person's control. Fleeting wooden fish used his own life to win true freedom for his granddaughter, Liuyan Ling. The moment Liuyan Ling voted for Lu Shihua, fleeting wooden fish had to die, Hao Tianjin said. Then this is also the Fleeting family's matter. What does it have to do with you? Long Shi Jiandi asked persistently. It seems that you have been completely blinded by fame and fortune, to the point that you can't see clearly what is happening behind the scenes. Hao Tianjin coughed a few times. What do you think of Lu Shihua's strength? What kind of achievements will he have in the future? Although he will definitely become an Emperor's sword-level sword wielder in the future, his strength is not that great. He is just relying on his bloodline. Long Shi Jiandi replied disdainfully. Then what about Gohan's strength? What if he ascends the throne and becomes an Emperor's sword-level sword wielder? Hao Tianjin then asked. Very strong. Long Shi Jiandi's expression suddenly turned serious as he said with a serious face, when he ascended the throne and became the Ocean Emperor, he was just a spirit sword-level swordsman. Although his strength was not as good as mine, I'm afraid it was not much different. Now that he has become an immortal sword-tier sword wielder, I am afraid that I will no longer be able to defeat him. Once he ascends to the throne, I'm afraid that even Zhi Tianjin won't be a match for him. Perhaps only Kanzu will be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Didn't you think it through clearly? This sword Immortal Hong Jun's current strength is already comparable to yours. He helped his disciple to the top. What are you dissatisfied with? Hao Tianjin said after coughing for a few more days. This is what I'm most angry about. Long Shi Jiandi clenched his teeth. If Sword Immortal Hong Jun comes in person, he can run for the position of chairman of the Sword Committee headquarters. Although I, Long Shi Jiandi, am unwilling, I am also convinced that he indeed has the strength to sit in this position. But why did he help his disciple to the top? Does he want to humiliate me like he used his disciple to humiliate those old guys in Yuzhang City? Long Shi Jiandi finally said the most resentful words in his heart. You are gravely mistaken. 3 days ago, this sword Immortal Hong Jun came to me and told me that for a long time, he will go to a place, and perhaps he will never come back, so he hopes that I can support his disciple. Hao Tianjin said. Where is he going? Hearing Hao Tianjin's words, Long Shi Jiandi's face instantly revealed a curious expression. In this world, besides the heavenly court, is there any place that sword Immortal Hong Jun will never come back? What if this place is the seamless corridor? Hao Tianjin said after a moment of silence. Seamless corridor. Long Shi Jiandi's body could not help but tremble, and he cried out involuntarily, what is he going to do in that damned place? Does he want to court death? He is going to save Al. Hao Tianjin's voice began to fade rapidly, and finally became so weak that it could not be heard clearly. Hey! Senior Hao Tian, don't say half of what you are saying. You have to make things clear to me. Long Shi Jiandi found that he could not hear what Hao Tianjin was saying, and suddenly became extremely anxious, and could not help but urge loudly. But no matter how Long Shi Jiandi urged, there was no longer any sound in the room. Wait. This guy can't be. Long Shi Jiandi suddenly thought of something, and immediately turned around, and said to Hao Tianjin's personal maids, who were standing in a neat line in the living room, hurry up and go in, I am afraid your master is in danger now, hurry up and go in to take care of him. No need. The oldest personal maid, who was the leader, raised her head, looked at Long Shurjiendi with a calm expression, and said, "Long Shurjiendi, before you came, Master had already told us that today is the day he will ascend to the immortal realm. None of us should disturb him, and let him ascend to the immortal realm quietly." Damn it! Why do you want to ascend to the immortal realm today? Could it be that this is also part of that person's plan? Long Shurjiendi clenched his fists and said with extreme unwillingness, "Your Majesty Long Shur, Master actually has a message for us to convey to you." The personal maid then said, "What is it? Tell me quickly." Long Shurjiendi said loudly, "Long Shurjiendi, please take the overall situation of the 8 major Bay cities as the most important thing, and the overall situation of mankind as the most important thing. Do the most correct thing." The moment the personal maid's voice fell, the whole house began to shake violently, and a dazzling golden light suddenly shot out from the room where Hao Tianjiendi was. The speed of this golden light was so fast that even an immortal sword-grade sword-bearer would find it difficult to capture it. Only an Emperor sword-grade sword-bearer like Long Shurjiendi could clearly see that golden light. "Congratulations to Master for ascending to the immortal realm! Congratulations to Master for ascending to the immortal realm!" The 6 personal maids of Hao Tianjiendi knelt down at the same time and sang in a loud and clear voice. At the same time, bright red blood flowed down from their facial orifices. In just a few seconds, these personal maids fell to the ground like clay figurines, without a trace of vitality. "Hao Tianjiendi, you son of a bitch! You actually used your own life to plot against me." Long Shurjiendi looked up to the sky and sighed, 2 drops of tears falling from the corners of his eyes. A minute later, Long Shurjiendi appeared on the ceremonial platform and applauded Lu Shihua at the same time. It was not until an hour later that all humans learned of 2 pieces of shocking news. Fleeting Wooden Fish, the hometown of the Fleeting Time aristocratic family, and Hao Tianjiendi of Yanjing City, had passed away in less than 10 minutes. There was no longer the existence of Fleeting Wooden Fish and Hao Tianjiendi, the 2 existences whose prestige had been awe-inspiring for decades. Mankind seemed to have stepped into the most dangerous situation, because from this day on, there was only one Emperor sword-grade sword-bearer. This was also a situation that had never happened in 1,000 years of history. From this day on, a new page had been turned in the history of mankind. In the ruins of the original Sichuan province's CD city, the extremely prosperous human metropolis of 1,000 years ago had disappeared without a trace. Even the remaining ruins could not be found. Instead, a large group of palaces with classical architectural style replaced it. This group of palaces was called Weiyang Palace. From the name, it could be heard that this was a group of palaces in the style of the ancient Han dynasty. In fact, the owner of this group of buildings was also famous. In the Martyr's Palace, he was known as the King of Benevolence and Righteousness, the Ian Grade Yuan Ko, Liu Bei Lu Xuanda. Liu Bei Lu Xuanda had been in this world for 800 or 900 years. During the long period of fighting, humans gave Lu Xuanda the title of the strongest Ian Grade Yuan Ko, which meant that humans recognized Lu Xuanda as one of the strongest Ian Grade Yuan Ko. After coming to this world, Liu Bei Lu Xuanda returned to CD City, where he had been the emperor. On the ruins of CD City, he reused a lot of manpower to build a large new group of palaces in Weiyang Palace. After that, Liu Bei and Lu Xuanda stayed in the Weiyang Palace for more than 800 years, until today. Recently, however, Weiyang Palace was not peaceful. Every day, the sound of bowls smashing could be heard, as well as roars that sounded like thousands of tigers roaring at the same time. However, this roar did not come from the real tigers. Instead, it came from the second master of Weiyang Palace, Liu Bei's sworn brother, Yuan Ko Zhangfei, who was also at the Ian grade. Everyone in the world knew that Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei were 3 sworn brothers. The 3 of them appeared in this world at the same time, and the three Liu Bei brothers were also one of the founders of the Martyr's Palace. Back then, the Martyr's Palace was founded by the three Liu Bei brothers and some other human heroic spirits, and the three brothers' relationship was known to the world. Guan Yu originally lived in Weiyang Palace. This was because the Glastonbury stronghold needed a stronger defense, so after a meeting of the higher-ups of the Martyr's Palace, they decided to send Guan Yu to assist in the defense of the Glastonbury stronghold. In the end, Guan Yu never returned, and he died at the hands of Long Shijiandi. With his good brother dead, the Weiyang Palace naturally couldn't be at peace. Zhang Fei would fly into a rage in the palace every day. There wasn't a day when he wasn't like this. "Big brother, don't stop me. Tomorrow is the day those humans are electing some chairman of the Sword Committee. That Gohan who killed second brother will definitely appear there. I'm going to Yanjing City to kill him and avenge second brother." Zhang Fei's face was red as he brandished his spear. "Third brother. This matter needs to be discussed at length. That Gohan must be hiding in Yanjing City right now. How can you harm him? Why don't you wait for Big Brother to gather more information and follow that bastard out of Yanjing City? It won't be too late for us to kill him then." Lu Xuanda tried to persuade him. "There's no need to go to Yanjing City. Aren't I here now?" As Liu Bei was trying to persuade him, a thunderous voice suddenly came from outside Weiyang Palace. Chapter 1378. Following Gohan's words, a figure dressed in black slowly walked into Weiyang Palace. In the end, he stood before Zhang Fei and Liu Bei. The moment Zhang Fei laid eyes on this man in black, he became extremely excited. His eyes turned red. Ever since Guan Yu's death, Zhang Fei had been looking at the pictures of Gohan and Long Shijiandi every day before he fell asleep. His goal was very simple. He wanted to firmly remember the faces of the two murderers of his second brother so that he could avenge him in the future. Thus, Zhang Fei was able to immediately recognize that this man in black was one of his second brother's murderers, Gohan. "Hey! You are the thief who killed my second brother, Gohan? Fight me, your grandpa Zhang Fei, for 300 rounds. Watch as I, your grandpa Zhang Fei, take your wretched life with a flip of my hand." Zhang Fei shouted at the man in black. Beside him, Liu Bei and Lu Xuanda's expressions changed several times. Liu Bei was not like Zhang Fei, who was impulsive. Especially when his second brother, Guan Yu, was killed, Liu Bei threw his brain to the side, leaving only his blood. On the contrary, as an emperor and one of the founders of the thick black study, Liu Bei began to feel somewhat uneasy. According to the information gathered by the Martyr's Palace, Guan Yu was killed by Long Shijiandi. Gohan was only there to restrain Guan Yu. As one of the strongest Ian rank Yuan Ko, Liu Bei had sparred with Guan Yu countless times. He believed that it would not be a problem for him to restrain Guan Yu. In fact, he could even do a better job than Gohan. At that moment, Zhang Fei was beside Liu Bei. The brothers were of one mind. With two Ian rank Yuan Ko cooperating with each other, Liu Bei was 100% confident that he could kill Gohan and avenge his second brother. There were no other possibilities. At that moment, Liu Bei did not know that Gohan had become a celestial sword wielder. The news had only spread among the upper echelons of humanity and a portion of the sword wielders. It would only be announced to the public one day later during the meeting of the Sword Committee. Therefore, although Gohan had become an immortal sword wielder a few months ago, almost no one in Yuan Ko knew about this. Logically speaking, Liu Bei should not be feeling any unease. And yet, Liu Bei was feeling extremely uneasy. The reason for that was simple. Gohan was no fool. Gohan would be able to think of anything that others could think of. Why would he take such a huge risk and come to the Weiyang Palace to find her? That was why Liu Bei could only guess one thing. This Gohan might have broken through to become a spirit sword tier sword wielder and become an immortal sword tier sword wielder. But was that really possible? Gohan was only 23 years old. So, there had never been an immortal sword-tier sword wielder of such a young age. Liu Bei was indeed an ambitious and ruthless person. Just from the little information he received about Gohan, he was able to deduce that Gohan might become an immortal sword-tier sword wielder. Second brother, let's go. We need to return to the Martyr's Palace right now. Liu Bei was an extremely cautious person. After confirming that Gohan might become an immortal sword-tier sword wielder, he immediately prepared to bring Zhang Fei back to safety. At that moment, however, Zhang Fei, whose eyes had turned bloodshot upon seeing his enemy, could not possibly listen to Liu Bei's words. He swung the Zhang long spear in his hand and stabbed it towards Gu Han's glabella. At the same time, a massive black dragon emerged from the Zhang long spear's tip to wrap around the Zhang long spear. It was as though Zhang Fei had stabbed a black dragon into Gohan's body. The might of the attack was unparalleled, as though it was capable of destroying the world. Third brother, your martial arts skills have improved again. Even I would have to dodge this attack. Although Liu Bei was feeling worried, he could not stop himself from nodding and praising Zhang Fei. In the next second, however, Liu Bei's face turned as black as a pig's face. In the face of Zhang Fei's overwhelming attack, Gohan calmly pulled out a sword from his scabbard. Then, he lightly tapped the black dragon's forehead with the tip of the sword. The black dragon, which had been unparalleled in might just moments ago, became like ice under the scorching sun. It rapidly melted away. As for Zhang Fei, his face turned red and he instantly coughed out a mouthful of black blood. It would appear that Gohan's attack had not only unraveled Zhang Fei's attack, it had also channeled the power behind the spear into Zhang Fei's body. That was why Zhang Fei could not stop himself from coughing out a mouthful of black blood. Don't you dare harm my third brother. Seeing that, Liu Bei felt even more uneasy. However, Liu Bei knew that he had to take action. Otherwise, his third brother might follow in his second brother's footsteps and die to Gohan. Big brother, although we cannot fight Lu Bu together like we did back then, today, let us fight side by side and avenge second brother. But today, let's fight side by side and avenge second brother. Zhang Fei said with bloodshot eyes when he saw his elder brother waving his dual swords and joining the battlefield. Hearing the story of how the three heroes fought Lu Bu, Liu Bei could not stop himself from becoming excited. He completely let go of the uneasiness in his heart and raised his twin swords high up into the sky. A golden light shone down from the tip of the swords onto Weiyang Palace. The instant the golden light shone down, countless bodies of flesh and blood crawled out from the ground and rapidly assembled into ranks. In the end, under the command of twofold swords, an army of over 10,000 soldiers appeared. From the moment Liu Bei raised the twofold swords in his hands, the entire process took less than 5 seconds. The army under Liu Bei's command was known as the White-Eared Elite Soldiers. They were Liu Bei's personal bodyguards back then. Every single one of them possessed combat power equivalent to that of a Dragon-class Yuan Ko. When these Soul-class Yuan Ko gathered together, under Liu Bei's command, they could unleash combat power equivalent to that of 10 Eternity Yuan Ko. This was one of the reasons why Liu Bei was able to become the most powerful Eternity Yuan Ko. Brothers, charge! As Liu Bei's sworn brother, Zhang Fei naturally had the authority to command the White-Eared Elite Soldiers. When he saw the White-Eared Elite Soldiers charging toward Gohan like a tidal wave, Zhang Fei immediately felt that victory was certain. Up until now, no sword-bearer who was not an Emperor's sword could survive the siege of the White-Eared Elite Soldiers. No matter how many pieces of trash there are, what's the use? Looking at the densely packed White-Eared Elite Soldiers, Gohan did not care about them at all. With a shake of the Celestial Slayer's sword in his hand, countless golden stars spread out in all directions with Gohan at the center. Any White-Eared Elite Soldier that came into contact with the stars would instantly vaporize, turning back into a pile of dirt and falling to the ground. With just one move from Guhan, Chaos Stars, more than 30% of the white-eared elite soldiers were finished. What a terrifying area of effect ability! Seeing that, Liu Bei could not help but turn pale with fright. The twin swords in his hands quickly issued out a new command. The white-eared elite soldiers immediately gave up on attacking Guhan. Instead, they charged toward Zhang Fei. The instant the white-eared elite soldiers made contact with Zhang Fei's body, they melded into Zhang Fei's body. When all the white-eared elite soldiers had entered Zhang Fei's body, Zhang Fei's entire body was 3 times bigger. His entire body was filled with explosive muscles, and his entire body's power was more than 10 times that of Zhang Fei's. This was the ultimate use of the white-eared elite soldiers. They could enter their companions' bodies and strengthen their companions' abilities in all aspects. Under Liu Bei's full command, Zhang Fei's strength had increased by more than 7 times. Unfortunately, 30% of the white-eared elite soldiers had been killed by Guhan. Otherwise, Zhang Fei's strength would have increased by more than 10 times. Knave! Return my big brother's life. After being strengthened, Zhang Fei brandished his 1/8 Zhang long serpent lance at Guhan once more. This time, however, Zhang Fei's attack was not interrupted by a single sword attack from Guhan. At the same time, he also suffered from internal injuries. This time, Zhang Fei and Guhan engaged in an intense hand-to-hand battle. One of them was a famous super warrior in the history of Huaxia, while the other was the strongest swordsman since the Great Calamity. The battle between the two of them immediately entered a white-hot state, and in the blink of an eye, they had already exchanged over 50 blows. Awesome! Awesome! Zhang Fei shouted loudly as he fought crazily. Although you are the thief who killed my second brother, I have never seen such a powerful sword technique like yours. Awesome! This fight is simply too awesome. Because of this sword technique of yours, I will definitely leave your corpse intact. You are awesome, but I am a little bored. What made Zhang Fei, who was in the middle of an intense battle, almost choke to death was that Guhan did not show the slightest bit of excitement. Instead, he revealed a somewhat lazy expression, as if he did not bring out his true strength to fight with him. Kill him! The enraged Zhang Fei once again exploded with even more power. He wanted to kill this foul-mouthed fellow right here and now. Forget it. It's getting late. I'm not going to play with you anymore. Guhan yawned. The sword in his hand changed in an instant. A power that seemed to be able to distort the entire world instantly enveloped the battlefield. Under the shroud of this power, Zhang Fei only felt that his 5 senses had become blurry. He could not even tell the difference between north and south. When everything returned to normal, Zhang Fei was horrified to find that his hands had been forcefully slashed to the ground by Guhan. The 1/8 Zhang long serpent lance that was like a black dragon had been broken into 2 and fell to the ground like 2 pieces of scrap metal. Zhang Fei, whose strength had been enhanced by 7 times, did not even know what had happened. He had already been defeated by Guhan. Third brother, your big brother is coming to save you. In the end, Liu Bei still had a bit of brotherly camaraderie. At that moment, he did not turn tail and run. Instead, he bravely brandished his twin swords and charged at Guhan with a desperate look on his face. Do me a favor and I will spare your third brother's life, Guhan said coolly. Very well. Liu Bei slammed on the brakes and sheathed his twin swords. With a sincere look on his face, he nodded his head. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.